When he heard this voice, Xianxia's tightly knit brows eased up while his expression became calm once more, and he didn't hesitate to turn around and leave the Tao-engraved battlefield. He'd already come to a complete understanding that it was the Tao Institute's dean that had rescued Xiaozi. In Xianxia's opinion, perhaps the voice of the Tao Institute's dean had answered a question in his heart, but to the cultivators of the outside world, it was like a thunderclap that caused them to instantly erupt into an uproar. They were filled with shock, wonder, surprise, fear, and disbelief. These various emotions were like a storm that had been suppressed for a long time, and it swiftly swept through the hearts of every single cultivator, causing them to be unable to refrain from exclaiming with surprise any longer. This expanse of the heavens and the earth was deathly silent no more. It seethed with excitement while all sorts of discussions rose and fell like waves that covered the heavens and the earth. He lost. Xiaozi was actually defeated with a single move. What exactly happened just now? Why would such a strange scene appear? My God! This battle actually made the Tao Institute's dean step forward personally. It's simply inconceivable. A single move? Xiaozi wasn't even able to resist a single move. If I'm not wrong, then if the Tao Institute's dean hadn't rescued him earlier, Xiaozi would have perished a long time ago. How could he have possibly resisted it? At this moment, even the entire 10-direction city had fallen into an unprecedented and mighty uproar. This battle was too shocking and astonishing. Earlier, most cultivators felt that Xianxia was simply making irresponsible remarks when he spoke about defeating Xiaozi with a single move. They felt it was extremely absurd. Coupled with the terrifying, imposing aura that Xiaozi had revealed as soon as the battle began and the void slaughter cross that was filled with the might to slaughter the world, it caused all of them to be even more confident that Xianxia would be utterly unable to defeat Xiaozi with a single move. But who would have imagined that Xianxia had actually accomplished it? It was even to the extent that Xiaozi wasn't even able to resist a single move of his before being eliminated. Thus, the spectators in the surroundings seethed with excitement and had burst into a mighty uproar. Moreover, it was so shocking that it far surpassed the previous battles. At this moment, the hearts of Lung Xinghuan, Donghuang Inxian, Kong Yuran, Yechan, and the others couldn't calm down. Xiaozi had lost, this was a fact now. Compared to that, they paid more attention to how Xianxia had defeated Xiaozi instead. The third level of the Sword Emperor realm is probably unable to bring forth such might. Perhaps the key to everything is the inheritance in the Sword Tao that he utilized. Lung Xinghuan pondered silently. He didn't have the time to feel pity for Xiaozi because the sword strike Xianxia executed earlier had caused him to feel a form of extremely heavy pressure. If I were to be the one facing that sword strike from Xianxia, even though I would be able to block it, it's impossible to be certain that he doesn't possess any other sword moves. At the same time, Donghuang Inxian and the others were contemplating the same problem. They seemed to have taken Xianxia to be their imaginary enemy, and they were comparing and analyzing their respective strengths and weaknesses. The more they thought about it, the more solemn and serious their expressions became, and they didn't dare continue underestimating Xianxia at all. On the contrary, they'd unconsciously taken Xianxia to be a formidable enemy that they had to approach with care. Convergence Hall. Fellow Taoist Lei Fu was right just now. This battle really is a pity. That little fellow from your sovereign sect wasn't even able to resist a single move. How surprising. When Ting spoke indifferently, even if her expression was calm to the extreme at this moment, but it was impossible to conceal the happiness in her heart. Even she'd been extremely shocked by Xianxia's display from before. Lei Fu's expression instantly turned gloomy to the extreme when he heard this, and he puckered his lips and kept silent. Xiaozi's defeat had caused him to be surprised and bewildered as well. Now, when he heard Wen Ting's ridicule, how could he possibly have the mood to enter into a verbal argument with her? He won. Xianxia won. Shinta Yanran, Lu Wuhan, Yu Qiujing, Zhuan Yushui, and the others spoke with delight, and they were unable to restrain the excitement in their hearts. At the spectating area, Imperial Monarch Jin Wu muttered, "The Banisher's reputation isn't sullied in his hand." At this moment, Xianxia seemed to have become the center of attention, and it caused his power and influence to grow stronger and shine brilliantly like the sun in the midday sky. On the other hand, Xiaozi, who'd been defeated, still had a ghastly pale countenance as he stood there by himself with a frustrated and dejected expression. At this moment, the surroundings were extremely bustling, yet it seemed like the world had forgotten about him. Huaikongzi shook his head and recovered from his slightly shocked thoughts. He was extremely shocked by Xianxia's display as well. However, he was even more surprised that the dean himself had acted during the battle just now. Obviously, the dean had discerned that Xiaozi was unable to resist that attack. But as the person in charge of the Dao discussion, he, Huaikongzi, was unable to accomplish that in time. So, it caused him to be unable to help but feel slightly ashamed and uneasy. However, this clearly showed how extraordinary Xianxia's attack was, because it even caused an imperial monarch like Huaikongzi to be unable to react in time. Huff, Huaikongzi let out a long breath of air, and then he recovered his calm. The 7 battles during the second level had come to an end at this moment, and the names of the 7 disciples that were victorious during this round was respectively Leng Xinghuan, Donghuang Inxian, Kong Yuran, Yechun, Wang Zhong, Yu Jihui, and Chen Shi. The Dao Institute had 2 disciples amongst them, and it clearly occupied a great advantage to become the winner of the 3rd level. Of course, the Oracle Mountain occupied a slight advantage as well, because besides Chen Shi, Gu Yan was in possession of that spot, which allowed him to smoothly advance to the 3rd level. However, this was merely the 2nd level. So, such an advantage was nothing because the true battles would only be carried in the next few levels of the Dao discussion's 2nd round. The names of the disciples who'd been eliminated during the 2nd level was respectively Qin Xinhui, Shi Yu, Zhu Qinyu, Fang Chongfeng, Jia Nan, Feng Zhongzi, and Xiaozi. Amongst them, the disciples that the spectators felt the most pity towards were Shi Yu, Zhu Qinyu, and Jia Nan, because according to the combat strengths they revealed, their strengths clearly surpassed Qin Xinhui, Fang Chongfeng, Feng Zhongzi, and the others. However, it couldn't be helped because their opponents were too formidable. On the other hand, the disciple that lost the most miserably in this round of battles was definitely Xiaozi. He hadn't even been able to resist a single strike before he was eliminated, and this had exceeded the expectations of everyone. It was also this battle that allowed Chen Shi to cut a striking figure that far surpassed the others, causing him to become the most striking person amongst them all. But no matter what, all of this had come to an end now, and the next round of battles was about to begin. So, it was undoubtedly like a completely new beginning for Chen Shi and the others who'd smoothly advanced into the 3rd level. Now, allow me to announce the start of the 3rd level. The battles in this round will be unlike the previous battles, and it'll be done in an enclosed battlefield. The outside world will be able to watch the battles, but the participants of the Dao discussion would be unable to observe the battles of the others. Just like before, your opponents will be decided by way of drawing lots. In the end, 4 will advance from amongst the 8 of you and will participate in the next round of battles. Huaikongzi spoke in a deep voice and announced everything related to the 3rd level. His voice reverberated through the heavens and the earth, and it drew the attention of all. Merely based on the rules alone, it really did seem unusual because the battles were actually being carried out in enclosed battlefields. To put it in simpler terms, after Chen Shi and the others had chosen their respective opponents, all those that weren't involved in the battle being held at that moment would be unable to watch it. Of course, the cultivators in the outside world were able to watch it clearly. Doing this is slightly strange. Could it be that they're worried the other participating disciples would notice something? That's definitely the case. Every single one of them would probably utilize all their abilities and trump cards during these battles. If the other participants witnessed these battles, then it would be equivalent to losing a deterrent force during the following battles. Exactly. If the others think of a method to deal with their trump cards, then it wouldn't be a trump card anymore. I don't think it's that simple, the spectators discussed animatedly. Chen Shi and the other participants couldn't help but arouse a wisp of bewilderment in their hearts when they heard these rules. However, when they thought about it carefully, if they fought according to these rules, then it would clearly be beneficial to all of them so they could accept it. The reason was extremely simple, because all of them weren't willing to expose their trump cards to anyone else besides their respective enemies. Just like the battle between Chun Shi and Xue Xiaozi just now. The might of his sword strike had shocked everyone, and Lung Xinghuan and the others had witnessed it clearly. Thus, they'd naturally made some comparisons in their hearts and thought of some strategies to deal with it, so as to avoid being taken by surprise when they encountered Chun Shi. Now, begin drawing lots. Huai Kongzi withdrew the ancient bronze lantern once more, and the flames within the lantern glistened and emanated a pure and divine aura. Chun Shi, Lung Xinghuan, Donghuang Yinxian, Kong Yuran, Yechun, Wang Zhong, Yu Jihui, and Gu Yan moved forward and selected a strand of divine flames from within the lantern, and then they swallowed it. In next to no time, strands of divine radiance that possessed various different colors surged out from within them. There was a total of 4 colors. Every pair of 2 disciples had the same color, and it perfectly divided them into 4 groups. Chun Shi's opponent was Wang Zhong. Lung Xinghuan's opponent was Gu Yan. Kong Yuran's opponent was Yu Jihui. Donghuang Yinxuan's opponent was Ye Chun. A mighty uproar instantly erupted when the list of battles for the 3rd level was revealed, and the sounds of discussion filled the surroundings. That dark horse, Wang Zhong, has actually encountered Chun Shi. Do all of you think he'll be able to create another miracle and smoothly advance into the top 4? I never expected that the Tao Institute's #1 disciple, Ye Chun, would actually encounter the Divine Institute's #1 disciple, Donghuang Yinxian. The outcome is truly difficult to foresee. Comparatively speaking, I feel even more anticipation towards the battle between Lung Xinghuan and Gu Yan. Alas, what a pity. I was originally looking forward to watching a genius like Kong Yuran go against Lung Xinghuan. Who would have imagined that her opponent would be Yu Jihui instead? Don't underestimate Yu Jihui. All those capable of ascending into the top 8 are peerless figures that are capable of leading a generation. All the spectators were excited and filled with anticipation. Only Shiryu was slightly depressed because he'd placed 2 natural spirit treasures on Chun Shi, but Chun Shi's opponent wasn't Donghuang Yinxian. The first battle, Donghuang Yinxian against Ye Chun. In next to no time, Huai Kongzi announced the beginning of the first battle. As for the other 6 participants, they'll head to the ancient springtime realm to rest and recuperate. As he spoke, he flicked his sleeve, and a mysterious door opened up in space for Chun Shi and the other 5 participants to enter. In an instant, Chun Shi arrived within the ancient springtime realm again. Unlike when he cultivated here earlier, even though he was unable to witness the scenes in the outside world, he could clearly hear the sounds and voices that came from there. The sounds of discussion from the spectators, Huai Kongzi's voice announcing the battle, and all sorts of other sounds like emotional sighs, wine cups being knocked together, and so on and so forth. He could hear everything. This was a very strange feeling. Everything could be heard yet couldn't be seen, and it caused one's thoughts to be unable to help but run wild. These rules are pretty strange. Chun Shi pondered deeply for a moment before he shook his head and sat cross-legged on the ground. He'd noticed that the temporal energy within the ancient springtime realm wasn't delayed any longer, and it was equal to the outside world. Obviously, the Tao Institute's dean had probably controlled the temporal energy here. Bang! It wasn't long before a wisp of collisions suddenly resounded from the outside world. It was like thunderclaps had filled the sky and surged endlessly. It was extremely terrifying. Even if he was within the ancient springtime realm, Chun Shi was still able to sense how intense and terrifying this battle was. Donghuang Yinxian and Ye Chun have entered into battle already. In an instant, Chun Shi determined this. However, he was unable to determine the situation of the battle by relying solely on the sound he heard. For example, what techniques they utilized, what style they adopted in battle, the divine artifacts they utilized. He was unable to determine all of that. Chun Shi couldn't help but frown because of this. In the end, he sighed in his heart and stopped thinking about it. He was very clearly aware that this was the effect that the Tao Institute sought to attain, and it was for the sake of preventing them from gaining insight into the exact situation of the battles. My God! What technique is that? It's too formidable. Look! Ye Chun actually resisted it. This. It's simply inconceivable. Amazing. They're formidable beyond imagination. Such a battle is much more shocking than the last 2 rounds of battles. So, this is their true combat strength. It wasn't long before a wave of clamorous voices erupted like an uproar that resounded through the surroundings, and it droned and rumbled without end, causing Xianxia to immediately be unable to help but frown. Even though he was able to maintain calm in his heart, he was unable to prevent his thoughts from thinking and imagining, but the outcome was that he wasn't able to figure anything out. Thoughts grew like shrubs in his mind, and it would only affect his vigor yet be unable to provide him with anything useful. Moreover, if this continued, then it would affect his Tao heart. It felt exactly like inner demons surging into appearance while in meditation. It would corrode one's thought before one realized it, and if the effects were serious, it would even cause one to show signs of experiencing qi deviation. Huff! At this moment, Xianxia suddenly took a deep breath while a strand of sharp thought arose in his heart, and it transformed into a sword of wisdom that severed all his distracting thoughts. In an instant, even though the sounds from the outside world still surged in incessantly, it was discarded by Xianxia's senses and were unable to affect him anymore. Those battles aren't related to me. I just have to stay true to my heart. As the saying goes, I'll remain immovable even if gales strike from all directions. Xianxia paid no further attention to the outside world. His expression was calm while his thoughts were clear, and he actually seized this opportunity to meditate. At this moment, it wasn't just Xianxia who'd noticed that this situation was bad. The others had as well. They immediately severed the disturbance from the outside world and started to sit cross-legged in meditation. Peerless figures like them possessed extraordinary wisdom that far exceeded their peers, so they were able to instinctively make the choice that was most beneficial to them, just like what they'd done right now. After an unknown period of time, a voice suddenly resounded. The first battle belongs to Donghuang Yinxian. The outside world seethed with excitement. Xianxia opened his eyes, and then closed them once more. He was like a clay statue and had an utterly tranquil expression. 2 days later, Hui Kongzi's extremely dignified voice resounded once more. The second battle belongs to Kong Yuran. The clamorous voices that seethed like an ocean accompanied Hui Kongzi's voice again, and it was obvious how many exclaims of surprise and shock had been caused by this battle. However, at this moment all of this was like a fleeting shadow that didn't affect Xianxia at all. It was even to the extent that he hadn't even opened his eyes. Time flowed by and another 3 days passed. The third battle came to an end, and Lung Xinghuan was victorious. At this point, the first 3 battles had ended. Right after the battle between Gu Yan and Lung Xinghuan came to an end, Xianxia silently opened his eyes and stood up. Even if Gu Yan lost, and even if he knew that Ye Chen and Yu Jihui had lost successively at the hands of Donghuang Yinxian and Kong Yuran, his expression was calm as before. OM. A wave of spatial fluctuation arose, and then a mysterious door appeared before Xianxia. It's finally my turn, Xianxia muttered, and then he strode through the door and vanished in the next moment. A pity. What a pity. Gu Yan was just a shred away from victory. It really is a pity. But it's undeniable that Lung Xinghuan is extremely formidable. Who would have imagined that he actually possessed so many trump cards? Only the final battle remains. If Xianxia loses in this battle, then the disciples of Oracle Mountain and the Tao Institute would have no chance of competing in the battles of the top 4. It's hard to say. Wang Zhong is definitely a dark horse who possesses unfathomable strength. Perhaps he might really be able to defeat Xianxia. What a joke! Everyone saw the sword strike Xianxia utilized to defeat Xue Xiaozi. Wang Zhong will probably be unable to resist it at all. When Xianxia appeared in the outside world, extremely clamorous sounds of discussion assaulted his face, and it was like he'd suddenly moved from a quiet gorge to a busy street in the mortal world. The outside world was extremely bustling. Even if Xianxia and Wang Zhong had appeared successively on the Tao-engraved battlefield, their sounds of discussion still hadn't stopped and grew more and more intense instead. Xianxia's expression remained unchanged when facing this, and it was like all of this wasn't related to him. Suddenly, Gu Yan, who stood in the distance, had drawn his attention. At this moment, Gu Yan's entire body was covered in blood, and his face was pale to the extreme. His body was still trembling as he sat cross-legged on the ground, and it was like he was enduring extraordinary pain. This caused Xianxia's eyes to narrow. He instantly determined that Gu Yan had suffered an extremely heavy injury and might even be on the verge of collapse. Swoosh! Xianxia's gaze shot towards the other side. He saw Leng Xinghuan standing there in an imposing manner with his hands behind his back, and his expression was cold and proud. Only his face was slightly pale. Obviously, the battle with Gu Yan had exhausted him greatly as well, but when compared to Gu Yan, he hadn't suffered much injury. Xianxia. Suddenly, a voice sounded out from behind Xianxia. Xianxia turned around to look towards its source, and he saw Ye Qian sitting cross-legged in the distance while looking at him. Even though I don't have a chance to fight you during the Dao discussion anymore, if you're able to defeat Donghuang Inxian in the following battles, then it would be sufficient to determine who's stronger amongst the two of us. Ye Qian had a pale countenance as well. However, his eyes were still bright while a wisp of a carefree smile hung on the corners of his mouth. Of course, the precondition is that you win this battle. Xianxia nodded. I'll do my best. Ye Qian grinned and said, do you remember what I told you at that time? In the entire world, you, Xianxia, are the only person I really want to fight. So, you better not let me down. Xianxia smiled. You've given me quite a bit of pressure. Ye Qian chuckled and didn't speak further. Take good care of him. Xianxia arrived by Tu Meng's side and glanced at Gu Yan. He remained silent for a moment before he patted Tu Meng on the shoulder and instructed in a low voice. Martial ancestral uncle. There's no need to worry. Tu Meng spoke seriously. Xianxia nodded, and then his gaze suddenly shot towards the distance. Wang Zhong was standing there with his hands behind his back, and he seemed like a graceful young master from the mortal world. When he noticed Xianxia's gaze, Wang Zhong smiled lightly and looked over as well. Their gazes collided in midair. Even though there was no verbal collision or competition of imposing aura between the two of them, a strand of an indescribably murderous aura had suddenly surged into appearance and suffused the surroundings. The clamorous atmosphere actually instantly fell silent at this moment. The hearts of many trembled, and they seemed to have sensed something and looked towards Xianxia and Wang Zhong. The fourth battle, Xianxia against Wang Zhong. At practically the exact same moment, Hui Kongzi that stood before Convergence Hall spoke in a low voice, and his dignified voice swept through the heavens and the earth. Swoosh! Swoosh! As soon as he finished speaking, Xianxia and Wang Zhong's figure flashed, and they arrived within the battlefield before standing in confrontation from afar. One of them was handsome, outstanding, and possessed an extraordinary bearing. The other was embroidered clothes, a crown of feathers, and had a carefree bearing. In practically an instant, they drew the attention of all the cultivators in 10 Direction City. This battle is about to begin. It's definitely the battle with the most suspense. Xianxia rose to prominence a few tens of years ago, and his name was unknown before that. On the other hand, Wang Zhong is the same. He's like a dark horse that suddenly appeared and amazed the world during the Dao discussion. I wonder what sort of collision would erupt from a battle between them. Exactly. Moreover, did all of you not notice? Their display since the Dao discussion began has been beyond expectations. Strangely, the two of them give me a similar feeling, and it's that they've concealed their strengths well to the point it's impossible for others to see through them. This is extremely interesting. The spectators in the outside world discussed animatedly, and they were filled with extremely great anticipation towards this battle. All of them really wanted to see if the dark horse, Wang Zhong, would be able to create another miracle and advance smoothly, or would he stop here? Xianxia remained indifferent towards all of this, and Wang Zhong seemed even more indifferent. As soon as they arrived within the battlefield, their gazes had locked onto each other as they sized each other up. Interesting, another savior of an era. Wang Zhong muttered in his heart while a mysterious smile arose on the corners of his mouth. And then he suddenly said, Xianxia, I've been paying attention to you for a very long time. Xianxia's expression remained composed. However, a rare trace of detest had arisen once more within his heart. and it was extremely incomprehensible. This caused his eyes to be unable to help but narrow as he suddenly said, "Jianan told me about your background." "Oh." Wang Zhong's brows raised as he stared at Xianxia for a short while, and then he smiled in a carefree manner and said, "The heavenly sight Jianan inherited from the Buddhist sect is extraordinary indeed, but I'm not in possession of the secrets you wish to obtain." Xianxia sighed in his heart. He was merely probing Wang Zhong, but he hadn't expected that Wang Zhong wouldn't take the bait at all. However, the more it was like this, the more Xianxia felt that Wang Zhong's true identity wasn't just a member of Golden Toad Isle. Wang Zhong was extremely mysterious, and the more others came into contact with him, the more difficult he was to see through. In Xianxia's opinion, Wang Zhong had concealed his strength much better than any of the participating disciples. However, Xianxia couldn't be bothered to think about that. This battle was the final battle in the third level of the Dao discussion's second round. No matter how unusual and mysterious Wang Zhong's origins were, this battle couldn't be avoided. Clang! Xianxia withdrew the banisher, and then he gazed indifferently at Wang Zhong and said, "Let's begin." Clang! Wang Zhong smiled lightheartedly and actually withdrew a sword as well. The sword was 4 fingers wide, over a meter long, and completely bright crimson. It emanated an extremely terrifying and sharp aura, revealed a horrifying scarlet-red hue, and it seemed as if it was made from the blood of the gods. When looked at from afar, it caused others to have the misconception that they'd seen a mountain of corpses, an ocean of blood, fiend gods roaring with sorrow, sages falling into oblivion, and all this suffering obliteration and ceasing to exist. What a terrifying bloody aura! What treasure is that? Wang Zhong never utilized that treasure before this. Could it be that his true trump card is his cultivation in the sword Dao? This fellow really concealed his strength well. All the spectators in the outside world were horrified as they'd sensed a terrifying, bloody, and murderous aura come from the blood-red sword in Wang Zhong's hand. An ordinary natural spirit treasure couldn't compare to this sword at all. At practically the exact same moment, Xianxi's eyes narrowed while he spoke lightly. "A good sword. It isn't just my sword that's good. My sword Dao is not bad as well. Watch out." Wang Zhong grinned. He had an upright bearing and wore green clothes that was tied by a jade-white belt at the waist, a shoe made from golden strands, and a crown of phoenix feathers. He seemed like the elegant and wealthy son of a marquis in the mortal world, and he had an extremely elegant bearing and seemed very well-mannered. However, the more he seemed like this, the more others were unable to see through him. Even if it was Huaikongzi, Wenting, Yuzhan, and the other imperial monarchs, they were slightly unable to see through Wang Zhong. This was very unusual. The unknown was usually the most terrifying, and Wang Zhong was undoubtedly a dangerous figure like that. After all, he clearly knew of Xianxi's cultivation at the third level of the Sword Emperor realm, yet he still dared to tell Xianxia to watch out at this moment. Moreover, he even spoke in such a carefree tone, and this made him seem even more unfathomable. "I've never been afraid of competing in the sword Dao with others." Xianxia seemed to have not noticed anything. At this moment, he seemed even calmer and composer, and it was like the heavens, the earth, the people, and everything in the outside world had been discarded by him. In his eyes, only Wang Zhong remained, and his sword was pointed at Wang Zhong alone. An invisible aura of the sword Dao effused out from Xianxi's body. The heavens and the earth fell into a motionless state, and it caused the expressions of the spectators to change while they felt suffocated. When he noticed the change in Xianxi's imposing aura, Wang Zhong's brows raised, and he suddenly suggested, "Since we're fighting sword against sword, then why don't we compete in a unique manner and end the battle swiftly?" Xianxi's heart was calm like an ancient well as he said, "Speak." At this instant, all the spectators in the outside world couldn't help but be curious. What exactly does Wang Zhong intend to do? It's very simple. Both of us will stand on the spot without moving and merely fight with the swords in our hands. If any one of us retreats more than 33 m or is unable to resist the sword Dao of the other, then it's considered as a loss. What do you think? Wang Zhong didn't hesitate to speak frankly. The spectators couldn't help but erupt into an uproar upon hearing this. If such a method was utilized, then the difficulty of the battle would be too much greater than an ordinary battle. Obviously, in order to avoid moving 33M away from where they stood, it was completely impossible for them to dodge. In other words, the objective of such a method was obviously to make Xianxia fight him head-on. The one who shrunk back would be defeated. The one who couldn't resist the attack of the other would be defeated. Where did Wang Zhong get the confidence to actually dare to propose such a method of battle? Could it be that he's fully confident in his ability to defeat Xianxia? If Xianxia really agrees, then the battle would be interesting. For some unknown reason, Wang Zhong seems too calm and composed, as if victory is within his grasps. I suddenly feel slightly worried for Xianxia. The spectators discussed animatedly. Most of them were surprised by the courage that Wang Zhong revealed, and even more were faintly worried for Xianxia. At this moment, even Wen Ting couldn't help but frown and speak with displeasure. What exactly does this disciple of the Golden Toad Isle intend to do? Instead of following the perfectly fine rules that were set for the Tao discussion and intends to make a new set of rules. Isn't he being a little too presumptuous? When he heard Wen Ting express her displeasure, Hui Kongzi, who stood outside Convergence Hall, frowned as well. After that, he shot his gaze towards the battlefield and spoke in a deep voice. Xianxia, according to the rules of the Tao discussion, there's no need for you to accept such a suggestion. All the spectators looked over when they heard Hui Kongzi intervene. Wang Zhong merely smiled when facing this, and he continued staring at Xianxia. This method of battle suits me perfectly. Xianxia actually spoke in agreement. The spectators were stunned. Hui Kongzi pondered deeply for a moment, and then he didn't speak in the end. Wen Ting sighed in her heart. She was slightly unable to figure out exactly what this young martial uncle of hers thought. Good. Merely based on this alone, I won't make you lose too terribly in the battle. Wang Zhong suddenly spoke loudly with praise, and his tone was extremely overbearing and domineering. I think it's best that you don't get happy too early. Xianxia spoke indifferently. You're right. I really was slightly rash. Wang Zhong slapped himself on the forehead and smiled lightheartedly, and then his expression turned solemn while he instantly became calm to the extreme. There wasn't even a trace of emotion coming from him anymore. This sword is called Tribulation Terminator. I hope you don't forget its name. Amidst his calm and indifferent voice, a wisp of strange and horrifying violet flames suddenly flashed in Wang Zhong's eyes. In an instant, his entire body was enveloped by violet divine radiance, and he was like a violet sun that was peerlessly dazzling and threw the surroundings into disorder. Woo woo woo, one could clearly notice that in an area of 33M around Wang Zhong, time collapsed, exploded into pieces, and transformed into violet torrents that spun incessantly and emanated sharp and ear-piercing rumbling. Wang Zhong stood amidst it. His clothes fluttered while his violet eyes seemed imposing, and he was like an emperor of the sword that had awakened from his slumber and possessed a domineering aura of supremacy. All of this occurred in an instant, and when everyone looked at Wang Zhong once more, it was like they were looking at a strange. Moreover, his domineering and fierce aura caused the expressions of many to change slightly. He actually possesses a strength at the third level of the Sword Emperor realm. An imperial monarch exclaimed with shock. Swoosh! Before they could recover from their shock, Wang Zhong had launched an attack. The scarlet red and brilliant Tribulation Terminator soared through the sky like a strand of bloody tears that flowed from the eye of a lover. It was gorgeous, bloody, and carried an all-powerful and unstoppable imposing aura. As soon as it appeared, the phenomena of a rain of blood and an ocean of blood actually surged into appeared within the battlefield, and it truly seemed as if it intended to drag the world into oblivion. It was extremely astounding. At practically the exact same moment, a wisp of a piercingly cold and sharp light shot out from Xianxia's eyes, and he didn't hesitate to transform the banisher into a wisp of light that soared through the sky. The profound heart sword technique, flowing light style. This strand of sword chi seemed to be ethereal and traceless, and it gave others the feeling that it was light and unreal. However, when it flashed through the sky, it sliced the round of blood apart and made them unable to descend, and it tore the ocean of blood apart. It was like this scene had been cut apart with a scissor. After that, it descended swiftly towards Wang Zhong. All of this had occurred too quickly, and there was no sound of collision or sign of might that shook the world. However, the strength revealed from that extreme calm was especially shocking. Bang! Wang Zhong smiled lightly and seemed to be not surprised that Xianxia was able to accomplish this. The tribulation terminator in his hand shook, and it shattered that descending wisp of sword qi into powder. Not bad. As he praised, Wang Zhong attacked once more. Swoosh! The might of this strike was clearly much stronger and filled with killing intent. The sound of the Tao resounded around the entire strand of sword qi, and it resounded through the heavens and the earth. Some spectators in the distance who possessed comparatively weaker strengths were shaken to the point their eardrums were on the verge of splitting. Moreover, the vital blood within their bodies roiled, causing them to feel extremely uncomfortable. Even if it was the imperial monarchs, their expressions changed slightly because the might of this strike exceeded their imagination. Xianxia's expression remained composed and unfazed when facing this, and not a trace of change appeared on his face from the beginning until the end. Swoosh! He struck with his sword as well. It was swift like a bolt of lightning that shot through the world and possessed the might of an ocean that could destroy a rock. It was extremely powerful and boundless. It was the profound heart sword technique, ocean cliff style. Rumble. This time, the commotion from the collision was extremely shocking. Divine light erupted while radiance rained down in the surroundings. It was like the sun and moon had collided, and the sound of the collision resounded through the world. The terrifying scene created by the collision was astonishing, and it caused many cultivators in the surroundings to be visibly moved. Obviously, this was a collision between two peerless sword emperors. Every single move they made produced a might capable of obliterating the world. They possessed boundless and monstrous divine might that could be said to be world-shocking, and ordinary people were unable to compare to them. A peak battle like this might not even occur in thousands of years, and it was extremely rare. Since the cultivators within 10 Direction City started cultivating until now, they'd never witnessed such a world-shocking battle. They were simply dumbstruck from it, and they cried out involuntarily in succession while being on the verge of forgetting to breath. Resist a strike of mine as well. Xianxia's expression was calm, while his dense jet-black hair fluttered with the wind. He seemed like a sharp glow that left the sheath of a sword, and his might horrified the world. As he spoke, Banisher let out a clear howl, and then it attacked with a fierce, murderous, and peerless accurate aura. Wang Zhong's eyes narrowed while his imposing aura strengthened along with the appearance of this attack. Moreover, the sword in his hand revealed an even brighter shade of red and simply seemed as if blood was on the verge of dripping from it. Bang! He attacked. His sword howled like a thunderclap that resounded through the world, and its imposing aura was ferocious, surging, and domineering to the extreme. In merely the time of a few breaths, their sword qi had collided no less than 100 times, and they fought to the point the world shook. The sun and moon dimmed in comparison, and all sorts of terrifying phenomena erupted. These phenomena included the collapse of the Grand Tao, the sorrowful wailing of gods, the rumbling of thunder, and the world falling into disorder. All sorts of phenomena appeared during the battle, and it caused all the spectators to fall into a state of shock. They opened their eyes wide while even their souls trembled. They were too formidable. Regardless of whether it was Xianxia or Wang Zhong, they stood on the spot and didn't move at all from the beginning until the end. However, the sword Tao they revealed far exceeded their peers and vividly displayed the might of the third level of the Sword Emperor realm. Two peerless Sword Emperors that had attained the third level of the Sword Emperor realm had started a world-shocking and peak battle before the eyes of everyone. All of the spectators were clearly aware that regardless of who won the battle in the end, that person's name would definitely go down in history and spread throughout the ancient god domain. Before the battle began, who could have imagined that Wang Zhong, who'd suddenly risen like a dark horse, would actually possess the might of the Sword Emperor realm's third level, just like Xianxia? Who could have imagined that this battle would actually be carried out in such a unique way? It could be said that amongst the 4 battles in the third level of the Tao discussion's second round, only this battle seemed to be even more striking and filled with suspense. On the Dao engraved battlefield, the battle was still going on. Chen Shi and Wang Zhong still stood on the spot without moving at all, and they seemed firm and steady like rocks. However, along with the passage of time, their combat strengths were increasing incessantly. Moreover, the destructive force created by the battle grew more and more intense. Sword light flowed. Divine radiance swept out. The tune of the Dao rumbled. The battlefield had been completely transformed into an ocean of sword chi, and the might of the sword Dao shocked everyone at this moment. Have all of you realized? No matter if it's Chen Shi or Wang Zhong, both their styles in battle are actually shockingly similar. Many people acutely noticed that when this battle had just begun, both Chen Shi and Wang Zhong hadn't utilized their full strengths. Their styles in battle were practically exactly the same. Both hadn't exposed their trump cards, and they were ceaselessly increasing their strength as the battle continued. Obviously, they were both unable to see through each other, so they'd adopted the most reliable strategy. On the other hand, such a battle was undoubtedly even more striking to the cultivators in the outside world. All of them were guessing in their hearts. Does Chen Shi or Wang Zhong have more trump cards? What's their limits? No one was able to discern this, so it caused them to feel even more curious. Moreover, since it was able to draw out the curiosity in the hearts of all the cultivators, it clearly showed how intense and shocking this battle was. Based on this, both Chen Shi and Wang Zhong are extraordinary geniuses in the sword Dao that are rarely seen throughout the ages. Merely based on the combat strengths they've revealed now, they aren't inferior to Lang Xinghuan, Donghuang Yinxian, and Kong Yuran at all. Someone compared both Chen Shi and Wang Zhong with the others. But in next to no time, his words were refuted. They can't be compared in that way. This battle is extremely limiting, and the rules are completely different from the previous battles. While it seems to be extremely intense, it has imperceptibly restrained their combat technique. Exactly. They're standing on the spot without moving, and every single attack is a head-on collision. But a real battle isn't like that. Some are skilled in attack and some are skilled in drawing out a battle. So, it's utterly impossible to distinguish who's superior if the current battle is utilized as the source of comparison. No matter how they evaluated it, in the eyes of the cultivators in the outside world, the battle between Chen Shi and Wang Zhong was a battle in the sword Dao, and it was a competition between the sword Daos that they'd respectively comprehended. Of course, it also included their Qi refinement cultivations, their cultivations in the Dao heart, their comprehensions of the Dao, the cultivation techniques they possessed, and various other aspects. When all of these forces were converged together, it became the source of the strength that they utilized to bright forth the might of their sword Daos. When this battle came to an end, it would be sufficient to allow others to determine exactly who was stronger and whose cultivation in the sword Dao was greater. Bang! After 10 minutes passed, a strand of shocking divine radiance suddenly flashed in Chen Shi's eyes. The banisher carried the divine radiance from a myriad of talisman markings as it attacked like a surging river of stars. At practically the exact same moment, Wang Zhong's eyes narrowed. He utilized the Tribulation Terminator to the limit, and it was like a blood-red flame that covered the heavens and the earth. Their attacks collided. It was like a storm that surged through the 9 heavens. Blazing and dazzling divine radiance fully illuminated this expanse of the heavens and the earth, and it was boundlessly brilliant. Stomp! 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 Under the astounded gazes of everyone, both Chen Shi and Wang Zhong's figure took 3 steps back simultaneously. There wasn't any different at all in the distance they'd moved. They were actually unable to decide on a victor with this collision. However, everyone acutely noticed that both Chen 11 and Wang Zhong's expressions had become serious and solemn at this moment. Moreover, their imposing auras grew stronger as well. When looked at from afar, Chen Shi was like an abyss that possessed a deep, imposing aura which was capable of swallowing the world. On the other hand, Wang Zhong was like a violet sun that blazed and surged. Slash! Wang Zhong attacked once more. His sword insight shot into the sky and threw the Grand Dao into disorder. Swoosh! Chen Shi puckered his lips and remained silent as he used his sword to collide head-on with Wang Zhong's attack. When they witnessed this scene, All the spectators were clearly aware that this battle had arrived at the most critical moment, and it was the most dangerous and horrifying moment as well. Moreover, it wouldn't be long before the outcome would be decided. No one spoke, nor did anyone allow themselves to get distracted. The thoughts and gazes of everyone had converged onto the battlefield, and it caused the outside world to be strangely silent. It was even to the extent that the entire 10-direction city was deathly silent to the point a falling needle could be heard. At this moment, the attention of Huaikongzi, Wenting, Yuzhen, Lei Fu, Qi Songzi, and the other great figures in Convergence Hall, and the attention of all the other imperial monarchs at the spectating area like Shintu Qingyuan, Imperial Monarch Xin Wu, and Imperial Monarch Ziwei had converged onto Chun Shi and Wang Zhong. Only the sounds of sword howls, collisions, space exploding into pieces, the wind blowing violently, and various other sounds rumbled from the battlefield and ceaselessly resounded in the surroundings. Bang! After another extremely intense collision, Chun Shi's eyes narrowed slightly. His vital blood roiled while he couldn't help but take 6 steps back. At practically the exact same time, the veins on Wang Zhong's became faintly visible, and he suddenly gritted his teeth. However, his figure still took steps back uncontrollably as well. Humph! Both of them grunted coldly at practically the exact same time, and then they collided once more. Rumble! After over 100 collisions, Chun Shi's figure staggered. He dodged a distance of 24 m to the side, and the energy within his entire body rumbled. On the other hand, Wang Zhong's imposing aura surged strongly. The pupils of everyone couldn't help but constrict. Could it be that Chun Shi's going to be suppressed? But in next to no time they noticed that they'd misjudged. Because in the next moment, Chun Shi attacked ferociously, and he forced Wang Zhong back by a distance of 27 m as well. This caused the spectators to be unable to help but feel shocked. It was merely a small difference in distance, but this was a collision between 2 peerless sword emperors. So it was obvious how terrifying and dangerous it was. It could be said to be filled with killing intent at all times, and the slightest carelessness might cause one to suffer defeat. The battle continued. However, when compared to before, it was even more dangerous and horrifying. As the battle went on, Chun Shi's face gradually became strained and covered in a solemn expression. Moreover, the vital blood in his entire body roiled incessantly. On the other hand, the veins on Wang Zhong's forehead had bulged up while he gritted his tightly. A brilliant cold glow could be seen within his eyes, and his entire body seemed as if it was completely on fire and was enveloped by an expanse of surging violet divine flames. Chun Shi, you'll definitely lose this time. Suddenly, a wisp of a cold and fierce arc appeared on the corners of Wang Zhong's mouth. He suddenly let out a long howl while the phoenix feather crown on his head suddenly exploded into pieces. His long hair stood on end and emanated a terrifying violet glow, causing him to seem as if he transformed into a primeval god of the sword. His imposing aura had actually instantly risen explosively by a huge amount. When they saw this, all the cultivators in the outside world were shocked and filled with disbelief. Tribulation Terminator. Before the spectators could recover from their shock, Wang Zhong held the Tribulation Terminator sword in his hand as he slashed. Bang! At this instant, the sky suddenly dimmed down and everything seemed to show signs of falling into a deathly silent state. It was extremely inconceivable. Tribulation Terminator, Tribulation Terminator. Could it be that he's really from that place? In the square of Vi, Jianan's gaze was dim and suffused with a gleam of wisdom. He seemed to have noticed something, and he had a rare solemn expression on his face. Chun Shi sensed a strand of the aura of danger when he faced this attack, and he felt invisible pressure assault his face. Swoosh! He didn't hesitate to utilize the profound heart sword technique's impeccable style. Sword images overlapped each other to form a completely round barrier of light, and it hid him from the world. Bang! A strand of abundant and enormous force collided forcefully with the light barrier. This attack from Wang Zhong seemed extremely terrifying and was beyond imagination. Even though Chun Shi had resisted it, his figure was forcefully blasted backward. Stomp! 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 Under the astounded gazes of the spectators, His figure stopped when he was just 30 meters away from the spot he stood at the beginning, and he was just a thread away from being eliminated. This allowed many cultivators to heave a sigh of relief, and they couldn't help but be extremely astounded in their hearts. Isn't this disciple from the Golden Toad Isle, Wang Zhong, a little too strong? Xianxia's vital blood roiled while his countenance was slightly pale. However, his expression was still indifferent and hadn't changed at all. Only his black pupils carried a wisp of an extremely murderous aura. Wang Zhong's face became even more icy cold when he noticed that this attack was actually unable to defeat Xianxia, and then seething and ghastly killing intent surged out from his eyes as well. Swoosh! Before he could launch another attack, Xianxia had attacked first. The Banisher transformed into a ray of light that seemed to have disregarded the obstruction of space and the restraints of the world, and it instantly vanished. In the next moment, it arrived just 30 centimeters before Wang Zhong's throat. This attack seemed mysterious and unreal to the extreme, and it was inconceivably swift as well. It caused Wang Zhong's pupils to suddenly constrict while his expression changed. Bang! Wang Zhong was caught off guard. So even though he'd safely resisted this attack, he'd been blasted back as well and barely stopped before he exceeded the distance of 30 meters. This caused his expression to finally change, and it became gloomy. But in the end, he suddenly grinned and revealed a mouthful of snow-white teeth. Is this your strongest attack? It's very good, but it's very unfortunate that the attack from earlier wasn't my strongest. Amidst his indifferent laughter, Wang Zhong's entire body rose into the air, and another sword had actually appeared in his left hand. The sword was completely white like snow, crystalline to the point of seeming translucent, and emanated a terrifying aura that was icy cold and bone-piercing. Dual swords. The cultivators in the outside world couldn't help but gasp. It wasn't that there weren't sword cultivators that utilized dual swords, and it was even to the extent that some could utilize thousands of swords. However, it was merely utilizing the swords, and the key was to truly bring forth its might. For an existence like Wang Zhong, being able to bring forth the might of a single sword to its limit was already sufficient to annihilate any enemy he faced. Yet now he'd withdrawn a second sword. This usually meant that based on the current strength he possessed, the combat strength he possessed would probably multiply. Just as they'd expected, once Wang Zhong held a second sword, his imposing aura had suddenly risen explosively. His violet hair fluttered while his eyes were suffused with a gorgeous yet icy cold glow, and he was like a primeval fiend god that had awakened from the ages and possessed boundless divine might. This sword is called Frostmourne. It's my favorite treasure, and it has been very long since someone has forced me to utilize this sword. Wang Zhong sighed lightly with slight emotion. Along with this sigh, the killing intent he emanated started to seethe even more, and it was like a volcano that was deathly silent for a very long time had suddenly erupted. Xianxia, you can be proud for being able to fall before Frostmourne. His indifferent voice drifted through the air as Wang Zhong launched another attack. OM! He lifted up the bright scarlet-red sword, Tribulation Terminator, that was in his right hand and slashed, causing an illusory and ethereal bloody glow to shoot out, and it emanated a boundlessly bloody aura that seemed to desire to drench the world in blood. Swoosh! At the same time, he executed a very simple stab with the crystalline and translucent Frostmourne that was brilliant like snow. In an instant, ice filled the world, and it was sharp and pierced the heart. Two types of sword techniques that possessed varying strengths had overlapped at this moment, and the grand and terrifying scene it created caused all the cultivators in the surroundings to feel suffocated while their hearts trembled. Such an attack could even make some imperial monarchs experience indescribable pressure. Rumble! The sword's chi shot over while emanating infernal whistling. It seemed to intend to completely restrain and crush him, and it caused others to feel powerless as if it was impossible to resist or avoid. The hearts of many rose to their throats, and they were extremely worried for Xianxia. Wang Zhong's strength was truly too formidable. He was like an unfathomably deep abyss and was formidable beyond imagination. So, how would Xianxia block the might he revealed after he utilized dual swords at this moment? Xianxia didn't block it. At the instant Wang Zhong attacked, Xianxia had chosen to attack as well. Swoosh! A wisp of an extremely flat and ordinary strand of sword chi shot out explosively. The profound heart sword technique, dismemberment style. This strike was completely similar to the attack he'd executed earlier. It didn't reveal even a trace of world-shocking might, and it caused many cultivators in the outside world to sigh in their hearts. Could Xianxia have really run out of tricks? Bang! A collision that shook the world resounded. The wisp of sword chi Xianxia executed had collided with the illusory blood-red sword chi first, causing divine radiance to spray towards the surroundings. Xianxia had destroyed this attack indeed, but before he could react, the strand of sword chi that came from Frostmourne had descended towards him. Bang! Under such circumstances, Xianxia could only resist it passively. However, his entire body felt like it was struck by a myriad of mountain, and it moved backward uncontrollably. 3 steps, 5 steps, 7 steps. Every single step backward Xianxia took, it caused the hearts of many cultivators in the surroundings to twitch while the feeling of worry in their hearts grew. It was even to the extent that many couldn't bear to watch. Because at this moment, the crystalline and translucent sword chi that seemed like a piece of ice had simply pressed down upon Xianxia like a divine mountain. Whereas, Xianxia seemed as if it was extremely strenuous for him to endure such pressure, and he could only retreat without end. OM! OM! This attack of Wang Zhong's was truly terrifying. It ceaselessly droned and emanated terrifying divine might under his control, and it smashed down forcefully at Xianxia. Others could clearly notice that Xianxia's clothes, hair, and brows were faintly covered in a layer of white ice. Moreover, his figure was still moved backward incessantly. In the opinion of the spectators, if such a situation were to continue, then it wouldn't be long before Xianxia would definitely be knocked out of the agreed-upon area. At that time, even if he was able to continue resisting Wang Zhong's attacks, he would have lost in accordance with the rules of this battle. How could this be happening? Even a figure like Xianxia is about to lose at Wang Zhong's hands. Someone sighed lightly. This attack is truly too formidable. Who would have imagined that the might of Wang Zhong's dual swords would actually be so formidable? Another sighed with emotion and felt shocked by the might Wang Zhong revealed. It's over. If Xianxia is eliminated, then the Oracle Mountain would be completely defeated and unable to join the next round of the battles. Some even started to sigh with regret. 8 steps, 9 steps. As Xianxia retreated incessantly, the hearts of the cultivators in the surroundings shook endlessly as well. They grew more and more anxious, and all of them had opened their eyes wide as they watched. Looks like there's no more suspense in this battle. Needless to say, Wang Zhong is unexpectedly formidable indeed. Lei Fu sighed with emotion in the Convergence Hall. Perhaps only my sovereign sect's disciple, Lung Xinghuan, would be able to defeat him. Ha! My Divine Institute's Donghuang Yinxian isn't inferior as well. Qi Songzi roared with laughter. Wen Ting's expression was slightly unsightly when she heard them, but she didn't say anything in the end. At this moment, all her attention was on Xianxia, and she was extremely worried for him. So, how could she have the mood to pay attention to Qi Songzi and Lei Fu's provocation? Young martial uncle, you must persist, Wen Ting muttered in her heart. On the Tao-engraved battlefield, the battle had entered into an unprecedentedly intense state, and it was at its most critical moment. Because at this moment, Xianxia was almost at the edge of the area that was agreed upon before the battle commenced. On the other hand, Wang Zhong's imposing aura blazed like a raging fire, and he ceaselessly attacked Xianxia with that wisp of sword chi from Frostmourne, which possessed shocking divine might. When they were compared, only a blind person would be unable to notice that Xianxia was in a disadvantaged position. While the battle was in such a situation, the battle might conclude at any moment. Xianxia, your combat strength exceeded my expectations indeed, but it's far from being at a level that can arouse fear in me. A person like you is bound to be absolutely unable to be a match for me. At this critical moment, Wang Zhong suddenly grinned and spoke slowly. He seemed as if victory was within his grasp, and it was like he felt Xianxia would be unable to turn the situation around and would definitely lose. Xianxia puckered his lips while his expression remained indifferent as before and was without any fluctuations of emotion. As Wang Zhong spoke, Xianxia's figure was blasted another 2 steps back, and he was less than a step away from passing the distance of 33 m. You still intend to resist stubbornly? As expected, a savior like you. Wang Zhong spoke again. However, he'd only spoken halfway when he seemed to have realized something, and he instantly shut his mouth and just smiled coldly. Right at this moment, Xianxia suddenly raised his head and gazed at Wang Zhong, who stood in the distance. Looks like you really do know a lot, but you are mistaken on one thing. Oh! Wang Zhong's eyes narrowed. However, he thought Xianxia was delaying intentionally, and he didn't intend to give Xianxia any chance. Bang! He controlled that strand of sword chi from Frostmourne and caused its might to strengthen. He seemed as if he intended to completely defeat Xianxia at this moment. Xianxia was just a step away from crossing the distance of 33 m. This distance was the border between victory and defeat. When they witnessed this scene, the hearts of all the spectators couldn't help but rise to their throats in unison, and they were nervous to the extreme. Time seemed as if it had stopped. Shinta Yanran, Lu Wuhan, Yu Qiujing, Zhuan Yushui, and the others couldn't help but seem to be unable to bear to watch this scene. Tu Meng and Gu Yan opened their eyes wide. Wen Ting couldn't help but clench her fists tightly. Right at this extremely critical instant, a sword howl that was clear like a bell resounded abruptly. After that, under the astounded gazes of everyone, another sword had actually appeared in Xianxia's left hand. This sword was of simple make and completely suffused by strands of natural energy that formed into dense and obscure divine talismans diagrams, and they coiled around the sword. When looked at from afar, it was like this sword was formed from the Tao of talismans, and it emanated a mysterious aura that rivaled the work of nature and creation itself. As soon as it appeared, endless sword howls surged through the 9 heavens. What's this? Everyone was shocked. Swoosh! Before they could recover from their shock, Xianxia had launched an attack. In an instant, mysterious talisman markings filled the sky and covered the world. The sword chi emanated from the sword shot through the world like a ray of light, and its might was simply terrifying to the extreme. Rumble! In an instant, the sword chi from Frostmourne that was pressing down like a divine mountain had been blasted into pieces. It seemed like glass that couldn't resist a single blow, and it was utterly destroyed. Rumble! Another horrifying sword howl resounded. The wisp of sword chi had crushed through space and the world to suddenly arrive before Wang Zhong. You! Wang Zhong's pupils suddenly constricted while he seemed to be filled with disbelief. He swung the dual swords in his hand to block this attack. However, in merely an instant, this strike of Xianxia's had struck forcefully onto his body, and his figure was blasted flying uncontrollably. Moreover, this directly resulted in him moving over 300 m backward. Thump! When Wang Zhong fell to the ground, his face was already flushed red and covered densely in veins. Moreover, his clothes were in rages. He took rapid breaths yet was unable to refrain from suddenly spitting out a mouthful of blood. In an instant, his flushed red face had turned pale, ghastly pale, and his entire body had completely stiffened on the spot. The surroundings were perfectly silent. The atmosphere in the surroundings was deathly silent to the extreme. All the spectators seemed dumbstruck, and they were still unable to believe everything that had occurred before their eyes. Indeed, all of this had truly occurred too swiftly, and it was swift to the point of being unbelievable. Since the moment Xianxia was on the verge of defeat to the moment which he suddenly withdrew a sword in his left hand and launched a counterattack that blasted Wang Zhong flying, this string of actions had practically occurred in an instant. It was swift to the point most didn't even have the time to see exactly what sword move Xianxia had executed before the battle had come to an end. So, this seemed exceptionally shocking to all of them. It was like an inconceivable miracle had occurred before their eyes, and they were utterly unable to accept and digest it. Thus, all of them were stunned speechless on the spot. The thing you were mistaken on is that I can utilize dual swords as well, and this is my trump card. Amidst this expanse of deathly silence, Xianxia looked towards Wang Zhong from afar and spoke indifferent. and his voice destroyed the deathly silence in the surroundings. Wang Zhong stared blankly as he stood on the spot. The corners of his ghastly pale lips still had a trace of scarlet-red blood on them, and he seemed to be unable to accept all of this. Impossible! It's impossible! How could a person like you be a match for me? This isn't real. This isn't real. Amidst his muttering, Wang Zhong's expression suddenly turned gloomy and savage. In the end, he actually started roaring hysterically while a voice that was filled with unwillingness. But you've lost. She couldn't help but shake his head when he saw this. And then he put his swords away before he intended to turn around and leave. Shi, this isn't my trump card. I still have many abilities that I haven't executed. Let's continue fighting. I'll definitely be able to defeat you. Wang Zhong seemed as if he'd gone mad and roared. Even if you lose, I'll still give you the spot to advance into the top 4. What do you think? I've said it before, you've lost, and I've obtained the spot to advance. Why would I continue fighting you? She didn't even look back, and he walked as he said, Don't forget that it was you who set the rules for this battle. I've already made concessions for you. He made concessions for me? Wang Zhong, who seemed as if he'd gone mad, was utterly stunned. And then he repeated the same thing over and over again. This is impossible. This is impossible. On the other hand, She had left the Dao-engraved battlefield already. At this moment, Wang Zhong stood on the battlefield by himself while he stared blankly ahead, and he seemed so lonely, dejected, and especially pitiable. When he witnessed all of this, Hui Kongzi took a deep breath, forcefully restrained the shock in his heart, and then said in a deep voice, This battle belongs to Shi. His dignified voice swept through the heavens and the earth, causing the spectators in the surroundings to recover from their shock. Uproars instantly arose in the surroundings, and they seethed with excitement. He won. Shi really won. Inconceivable. It's truly too inconceivable. I never expected that She would actually made a miraculous counterattack at the critical moment and defeat Wang Zhong in one go. Alas, this dark horse Wang Zhong will be stopping here. But based on his display during the last few battles, it's sufficient for him to become renowned in the world and known to the entire ancient god domain. Amazing! Did all of you see it clearly? That sword she withdrew at the end possessed extremely formidable might. It's obviously an extraordinary natural spirit treasure. Yeah, who would have imagined that she actually kept it hidden so well, and he wasn't willing to utilize it until the final moment. Exclaims of surprise could be heard incessantly, and a mighty uproar had arisen in the entire 10-direction city. Convergence Hall. When Ting let out a long sigh of relief and relaxed her tightly clenched hands. Moreover, a wisp of a smile had suffused the corners of her mouth, and she herself was in high spirits. Even though she hadn't spoken a single word, Lei Fu and Qi Songzi's expressions had become rather gloomy at this moment. How could they have imagined that Shi, who originally seemed to be losing for sure, would actually turn the desperate situation around and launch an extremely gorgeous counterattack? That little bastard. He really is tenacious. Both of them cursed in their hearts. If Wang Zhong really is a descendant of that place, then Shi's ability to defeat him is very unusual. Jianan was stunned. He stared at Wang Zhong, who stood on the battlefield, and recalled that final attack she had executed earlier, and he actually fell into deep contemplation. His display was completely different from the other cultivators, and it seemed rather unusual. Unfortunately, the gazes of most people were converged onto Shi, and no one noticed Jianan's unusual reaction. He won. Shinta Yenran suddenly stood up and was unable to restrain the happiness in her heart, causing her peerlessly gorgeous face to seem even more delicate and charming. He won. Lu Wuhan, Yu Qiujin, Zhuan Yushui, and the others repeated the same words, and they were unable to calm down for a long time. The combat strength she revealed was too formidable, and it was like she was a completely different person when compared to the strength she possessed at that time in the desolate Manka ruins. This caused all of them who were companions of his in the past to feel like he was beyond their reach. He won. At practically the exact same moment, within the ancient springtime realm that was isolated from the outside world, Lang Xinghuan, Donghuang Inxian, and Kong Yuran had simultaneously awoken from their meditation and opened their eyes. After they won their respective battles, they'd been successively teleported back into the ancient springtime realm, and they were unable to witness everything that was occurring in the outside world. So, they were utterly not aware of the specific circumstances in the battle between Chen Shi and Wang Zhong. However, merely based on the clamorous noise that shook the outside world, it was sufficient for them to determine that Chen Shi's win was very beautiful. I never expected that even Wang Zhong was actually not a match for him. Leng Xinghuan frowned. His evaluation of Wang Zhong was extremely high, and he'd even taken Wang Zhong to be an opponent that he had to handle carefully. But he'd never imagined that this fellow who possessed unfathomable strength would actually be defeated at Chen Shi's hands. Looks like I must take him to be a formidable enemy if I encounter Chen Shi in the following battles. At practically the exact same moment, Donghuang Inxuan's brows raised while his violet pupils emanated a wisp of shocking light. I knew that fellow, Chen Shi, had concealed even more strength than Wang Zhong. Kong Yuran suddenly stood up and stretched herself lazily, and then her moist red lips curved into a smile. In next to no time, a strand of spatial fluctuation swept throughout the ancient springtime realm, and then 3 mysterious doors appeared before the 3 of them. They didn't hesitate to stride through the door simultaneously, and then they swiftly vanished. They were clearly aware that the battles of the 4th level would begin soon. Clamorous noise resounded throughout the surroundings. However, Chen Shi seemed to have not noticed at all. He just walked over to Tu Meng and Gu Yan's side, and then he immediately heaved a sigh of relief after taking a short glance at Gu Yan, who was meditating there. Fortunately, even though Gu Yan's injuries were heavy, it hadn't harmed his foundation. Martial ancestral uncle, quickly rest yourself so as to prevent your strength from being affected during the next round of the battles. Tu Meng spoke with a concerned tone. Chen Shi smiled and said, "All right." He hadn't suffered any injury. The battle between him and Wang Zhong had merely been carried out for the time for an incense stick to burn, and it had merely exhausted his divine energy, while the consumption of his heart energy wasn't much. However, if he participated in the following battle while in such a state, then it would definitely affect his performance. After, his next opponent might be Leng Xinghuan, Donghuang Inxian, or Kong Yuran. When fighting such figures, even the slightest weakness might cause one to suffer defeat. So Chen Shi didn't dare be careless at all. He sat down cross-legged and started to meditate. Almost 6 hours were provided for them to recuperate before the next round of battles commenced, and it was sufficient for Chen Shi to recover to his peak state. During this period of time, Hui Kongzi had asked if Chen Shi wanted to enter the ancient springtime realm to recover, because in that way he would definitely recover much more quickly. However, Chen Shi had refused. It wasn't that he was acting carelessly and arrogantly, and it was instead because he felt it wasn't necessary. Martial ancestral uncle, I watched all the battles in the 3rd level. I was roughly able to determine that based on the trump card that you revealed earlier, it's sufficient for you to go against any one of those 3. While Chen Shi recovered, Tu Meng analyzed the situation at his side. However, you can't be careless. Those 3 fellows aren't ordinary figures at all. They might still have some trump cards up their sleeves. Chen Shi listened silently while he thought in his heart. If it's a competition of trump cards, then I'm afraid of no one. Eldest senior brother, you must be careful of that kid. Chen Shi. He possesses an even more powerful sword, and it's an extraordinary natural spirit treasure. Yes, Chen Shi relied on the might of dual swords to defeat Wang Zhong. Senior sister Kong, Chen Shi's combat strength is extremely shocking, and he really concealed his strength well. If you encounter him, then you absolutely can't be careless. At practically the exact same moment, Leng Xinghuan, Donghuang Inxian, and Kong Yuran were listening to the analysis of their fellow brothers and sisters. Actually, it wasn't just them. After they recovered from the shock caused by Chen Shi's counterattack, all the cultivators within 10 Direction City were analyzing the combat strengths of Leng Xinghuan, Donghuang Inxian, Kong Yuran, and Chen Shi. The spectators in the outside world had clearly witnessed all the battles they'd participated in, but it seemed extremely difficult to actually choose someone that was the most formidable from amongst them. Or perhaps all of those cultivators had different judgments in their hearts, and it was very difficult to obtain a uniform opinion of the person who was the strongest. So, there was a huge amount of argument as well. No matter what, Lung Xinghuan won every single battle in a direct manner. And this wasn't something that the others could accomplish. This was the opinion of those cultivators that supported Lung Xinghuan. How could combat strength be determined in that way? I think that Donghuang Yinxian is the strongest. His style in combat is very steady, and he pushes down step by step towards his opponent, and the more one acts in this way, the more terrifying one is. This was the opinion of Donghuang Yinxian's supporters. All of you've seen Kong Yuren's style in battle. She's absolutely domineering and doesn't give her opponents any chance to catch their breaths. Anyone who becomes her opponent would absolutely be unable to gain any advantage in a battle with her. This was the opinion of those that supported Kong Yuren. On the other hand, the cultivators that supported Chun Shi usually described Chun Shi with a single word, unfathomable. In short, every single cultivator was filled with anticipation towards the battles of the top for that were about to begin, and they discussed excitedly, causing the surroundings to be extremely clamorous. But in next to no time, all of these voices actually vanished simultaneously. All of them seemed to have sensed something, and they looked towards the sky in unison. Moreover, all their faces revealed a wisp of surprise and bewilderment. At this moment, the hearts of Chun Shi, Lung Xinghuan, Donghuang Yinxian, Kong Yuran, Hui Kongzi, Wen Ting, Lei Fu, Qi Songzi, and all the other participants and imperial monarchs shook before they swiftly looked towards the same direction. The atmosphere was indescribably deathly silent at this moment, and only the sound of the wind whistled through the surroundings. Luckily, I was able to arrive before the Tao discussion came to an end. Suddenly, a warm voice resounded, and then a mighty and dignified figure appeared out of thin air. He had snow-white hair, a warm appearance, eyes that were deep and boundless like the starry sky, and he emanated an ancient and calm aura. Why rush over anxiously? Did you come to give your life away? At practically the exact same moment, a hunched and emaciated old man whose face was densely covered with wrinkles appeared soundlessly at the other side of the sky. As soon as he appeared, his muddy eyes shot towards the man with snow-white hair that had made an appearance just now. The man with snow-white hair merely grinned and didn't say anything. Looks like everyone is here. A voice that was charming and pleasing to the ear resounded. At another side of the sky, an extremely gorgeous snow crane carried a woman in plain clothes as it fluttered over. At the same time, a middle-aged man in Taoist robes appeared soundlessly at another side, and he had a conservative, firm, and boundlessly dignified expression. In the blink of an eye, 4 figures had appeared at 4 different corners of the sky. The aura of every single figure didn't seem very formidable. However, when they appeared here, a wisp of astonishment couldn't help but surge from the hearts of every single cultivator that was here, and their pupils dilated while they didn't dare believe their eyes. Even the hearts of the imperial monarchs shook simultaneously while shock appeared on their faces, and they became slightly reserved and respectful. The atmosphere had become deathly silent. Only those 4 figures stood upright in midair like 4 supreme overlords that resided in the 4 cardinal directions. Ha ha ha! I apologize for being unable to welcome fellow Taoists in advance. Right at this moment, an aged and heroic voice resounded in the sky above Convergence Hall. Accompanying this voice was a gray-clothed old man with graying hair that appeared out of thin air. When the gray-clothed old man appeared here, the atmosphere instantly fell into an unprecedentedly deathly silent state. It was too terrifying. Who would have dared to imagine that 5 Tao Lords would actually appear successively in the short period of a few breaths of time? The Tao Lord realm, a height that had long since arrived at the peak of the divine Tao. They were terrifying existences that had started to comprehend the grand Tao of destiny. Since the ancient times until now, all those in the entire ancient god domain who were able to attain the Tao Lord realm possessed extraordinary and supreme might. Existences like these were extremely rare and few, and it was even to the extent that they could be counted with ease. If it was at any ordinary time, then great figures at the Tao Lord realm would very rarely make an appearance in the world. so most cultivators hadn't truly laid eyes on the appearance of a Tao Lord since they'd started cultivating until now. Yet now, 5 had appeared in an instant. The shock from this was simply indescribable, and it caused everyone in the surroundings to be shocked and fall silent like cicadas in the winter as they didn't dare make a sound. Fellow Taoists, the Tao discussion hasn't come to an end yet. Why don't all of you come with me to the Convergence Hall to watch the battle? The gray-clothed old man smiled as he spoke. All right, that's exactly what I intended to do. The other 4 Tao Lords nodded as well, and then they left with the gray-haired old man. They strode through space and swiftly vanished within the Convergence Hall. Bang! As soon as this group of people vanished, a mighty uproar immediately erupted in the surroundings, and all the people here seethed with excitement, causing clamorous noise to surge through the entire world. The Grand Lord of Oracle Mountain, Wuxia. My God! Such a legendary figure has actually made an appearance here today. The divine sovereign priest of the sovereign sect, Su Tuo, the heavenly educator of the Divine Institute, Xianming, the palace master of the Light Palace with Nuos Dao Palace, Xueling, and the Tao Institute's Tao Conferral Elder, Kaya, are here as well. The 5 extremes of the Imperial region have respectively dispatched a great figure at the Tao Lord realm. This is truly a rare occurrence. Could it be that something major is about to occur? Don't forget the objective of the Tao discussion is to select 30 disciples to enter the forgotten grounds of chaos in search of fortune. The appearance of these 5 Tao Lords is probably related to this. To be able to lay eyes upon the appearance of Tao Lords truly makes this trip worth it. Did all of you hear what the divine sovereign priest Su Tuo said earlier? He actually said that the Grand Lord Wuxia was rushing to come give his life away. At that time, it terrified me to the point I thought a battle between Tao Lords was about to erupt. Haha, that would definitely not occur. It's probably because the Grand Lord Wuxia killed the divine sovereign priest Mo Lin a few years ago, and Tao Lord Mo Lin is Tao Lord Su Tuo's junior brother. So that's the reason. All sorts of sounds of discussion resounded, and all the topics of conversation were concentrated on the 5 Tao Lords from the 5 extremes of the Imperial region: Wuxia, Su Tuo, Xianming, Xueling, and Kaya. All of their faces were covered in surprise, reverence, respect. It caused the surroundings to be bustling and seething with excitement to the extreme. After all, it was truly too rare to be able to see 5 extraordinary great figures of legend in a single day, and it was probably difficult to come by even in a few tens of thousands of years. Elder senior brother is here. Xianxia frowned instead. He was very clearly aware that after Wuxia crushed Tao Lord Mo Lin at that time, Wuxia had been ambushed by the master of the sovereign sect, and if it wasn't for his second martial uncle, Di Shun's timely arrival, Wuxia might have suffered calamity. Now Wuxia had left Oracle Mountain by himself. Under such circumstances, if the sovereign sect's master schemed against Wuxia again, then the consequences would truly be difficult to ascertain. But in next to no time, Xianxia shook his head and stopped thinking about it. Since his eldest senior brother dared to come here alone, then he'd definitely considered this. Within Convergence Hall, the atmosphere here was different. No matter if it was when Ting, Yuzhen, Huaikongzi, Leifu, or Qisongzi, when they saw these 5 Tao Lords arrive simultaneously, all of them immediately stood up to greet the Tao Lords and didn't dare act impetuously at all. Martial nephew, you continue presiding over the Tao discussion. Leave the matters within the hall to me. The gray-clothed old man, Kaya, instructed before he asked Wuxia and the others to sit down. Huaikongzi received his orders and left. On the other hand, when Ting, Yuzhen, Leifu, and Qisongzi moved over and stood behind the seniors of their respective sections. Fellow Taoists, you came just at the right moment. There are only 2 rounds of battles left before the Tao discussion comes to an end, and the list of the top 4 disciples has already been revealed. It's respectively Leng Xinghuan, Donghuang Yinxian, Kong Yuran, and Chen Shi. After they took their seats, Tao Lord Kaya smiled as he spoke. Unfortunately, not a single one of my Tao Institute's disciples were able to ascend into the top 4. His voice carried a wisp of self-ridicule. Just as Kaya had said, The 4 disciples in the top 4 just happened to be from the Sovereign Sect, Divine Institute, Nuos Dao Palace, and Oracle Mountain, and only the Dao Institute didn't have a disciple amongst them. It seemed to be a very tricky situation. In my opinion, this outcome fully coincides with the intentions of your Dao Institute. Dao Lord Xian Ming spoke indifferently. Kaya grinned and didn't put up any argument. After that, he suddenly said, "Fellow Taoists, I wonder which little fellow all of you think will be able to obtain the first position in the Dao discussion." These words seemed to be slightly unnecessary because these 4 Dao Lords would definitely feel that the disciple from their own sect would be able to attain victory. Kaya was clearly not a stupid person, but he'd still spoken these words at this moment. So it was slightly thought-provoking. Wu Shuachan smiled but didn't answer directly. He withdrew a jade box that was completely suffused with chaotic chi instead, and then he placed it on the table before him. After that, he said, "No matter who obtains the first, this is my Oracle Mountain's reward to that disciple." Kaya said with interest, "Does the jade box contain a natural spirit treasure?" Wu Shuachan nodded and said, "Exactly. It's called the Infinite Skybreak Shuttle. What does fellow Taoist Kaya think about this reward?" The Infinite Skybreak Shuttle. The eyes of all the great figures within the hall narrowed, and they seemed to have heard of this treasure. Dao Lord Kaya clapped and exclaimed with admiration, "An outstanding treasure! According to legend, it's a precious treasure passed down from Senior Fushi, and it's extraordinary. It's more than enough to be the reward for the first in the Dao discussion." As he spoke, he swept the other Dao Lords with his gaze and suddenly smiled as he said, "Grand Lord, are you not worried that this treasure would be obtained by the disciples of the other fellow Taoists that are present here?" Wu Shuachan smiled lightheartedly and said, "If they have the ability, then they can feel free to take it." Kaya smiled and said, "Looks like Grand Lord is extremely confident in the young junior brother of yours." As he spoke, he flicked his sleeve and withdrew a jade box as well. He placed it on the table and said, "As the host of the Dao discussion, it would be inexcusable if my Dao Institute didn't provide a reward. According to the instruction of my Dao Institute's dean, regardless of who obtains the first in the Dao discussion, this spirit void garment will belong to that person." The spirit void garment. The hearts of many shook fiercely when they heard this. It was a precious treasure as well, and its miraculous effects were unfathomable while its defensive ability was peerless. In next to no time, the gazes of many descended onto the Sovereign Sect's Su Tuo, the Divine Institute's Shen Ming, and Nuos Dao Palace's Xue Ling. "Since all of you have such interests, then my Sovereign Sect will provide a reward for the disciple ranked at the first position in the Dao discussion." Su Tuo spoke in a hoarse voice. As he spoke, he'd withdrawn a black jade box and tossed it onto the table. Within this jade box is an ancient treasure that my Sovereign Sect's master found in the 3 dimensions, and it's called the Yin-Yang Universe Flag. I presume all of you've heard of it a long time ago, so I won't provide any further explanation. The Yin-Yang Universe Flag. It wasn't just an ancient treasure, it was a renowned natural spirit treasure as well. When they saw that Wu Shuachan, Kaya, and Su Tuo had respectively produced a treasure as the reward for the disciple that attains the first, the Divine Institute's Shen Ming and Nuos Dao Palace's Xue Ling didn't hesitate to withdraw a treasure in succession. One was the Globe Halberd from the Divine Institute, and the other was the Myriad Dao Pearl from Nuos Dao Palace. Both these divine artifacts were precious treasures even amongst natural spirit treasures, and they possessed extraordinary divine might. Kaya couldn't help but sigh with emotion when he saw this. "Now, even my eyes are turning slightly red with envy. I wonder exactly which little fellow would have the opportunity to obtain such generous rewards." It wasn't just Kaya. When they stay this scene, even when Ting Yuzhen, Lei Fu, and Qi Songzi, who stood at the side, couldn't help but be shocked and unable to refrain from having a wisp of dense envy arising in their hearts. It was 5 natural spirit treasures. Moreover, every single one of them were precious even amongst natural spirit treasures. Yet now they'd all become a form of reward. So, how could all these great figures at the Imperial Monarch realm not feel envious and tempted by it? After all, even existences at the Imperial Monarch realm like them would absolutely not possess more than 5 natural spirit treasures. However, they were clearly aware that the meaning behind these rewards were not simple, and the 5 sects were clearly carrying out a bet. They were betting on exactly which sect's disciple would be able to obtain the first in the Tao discussion. Dang! Right at this moment, a heavy sound of the bell resounded slowly outside the hall and swept through the heavens and the earth. In an instant, the gazes of everyone within the hall shot over. Because the battle of the top 4 in the 4th level of the Tao discussion's second round was about to begin. The sound of the bell drifted slowly, and the clamorous noise in the outside world was quickly suppressed to the point of vanishing. The atmosphere became solemn and quiet along with this, and the gazes of everyone had shot towards Huaikongzi that stood before Convergence Hall. The 4th level begins now. Huaikongzi had a dignified expression as he spoke in a deep voice. There are a total of 2 battles in this level. The first is between the sovereign sects Lang Xinghuan and Kong Yuran from Nuwas Dao Palace. The second battle will be between the Divine Institutes Donghuang Yinxian and Oracle Mountains Xianxia. The roster for these battles was set by my Tao Institute's dean. Feel free to voice out any objections you have. As he spoke, Huaikongzi's gaze descended onto Qianxia, Lang Xinghuan, Donghuang Yinxian, and Kong Yuran, who were standing on the square of Vi. Even though the roster hadn't been determined by way of drawing lots this time, the arrangement was very clever and extremely reasonable. After all, it was common knowledge that the Oracle Mountain and Nuwas Dao Palace had a good relationship, whereas both the Sovereign Sect and Divine Institute were the same as well. If Lang Xinghuan were to be made to fight Donghuang Yinxian and Qianxia was made to fight Kong Yuran, then it would make the battles less interesting and less pleasurable to watch. Moreover, such an arrangement would definitely not arouse displeasure from Qianxia and the others. It's even to the extent that one could say that such arrangements conformed with the intentions and expectations of everyone. There was nothing that anyone could question about. Of course, Lang Xinghuan and Qianxia could be made to fight each other while Donghuang Yinxian and Kong Yuran fought each other. However, the difference between these options wasn't great, so would anyone care? Since you have no objections, then let the next round of battles begin. When he noticed no objection from the 4 of them, Huaikongzi didn't hesitate to immediately announce the commencement of the 4th level. On the Tao engraved battlefield, Lang Xinghuan and Kong Yuran stood in confrontation from afar. The atmosphere between them was murderous. At this moment, the gazes of everyone had converged onto Lang Xinghuan and Kong Yuran, and they held their breaths in concentration and remained silent. Even the great figures at the Tao Lord realm within Convergence Hall were no exception. This was the first battle between the top 4 disciples, and the victor would participate in the final battle for the position of first in the Tao discussion. On the other hand, the defeated would have no choice but to stop here. You possess the bloodline of the primeval Peacock King and have grasped the 5 supreme inheritances of Nuwas Dao Palace. You're an opponent that's worthy of me taking seriously, so I will go all out in the battle that's about to begin. Lang Xinghuan stood with his hands behind his back while his long blood-red hair fluttered, and his cold and indifferent voice revealed a strand of a domineering aura of supremacy. This was the first time Lang Xinghuan had spoken before a battle throughout the Tao discussion, and it clearly showed how seriously he took Kong Yuran. Oh, should I feel honored by that? Kong Yuran had a lazy bearing, and her voice was soft, cold, and pleasing to the ear. She was carefree and composed to the extreme, but in terms of imposing aura, she was actually on par with Lang Xinghuan, and they each exceeded the other in different aspects. There's no need for that. But once you've been defeated, then perhaps you'll be able to clearly understand the gap between us. A wisp of blood-red color suffused Lang Xinghuan's eyes while his imposing aura grew even more oppressive. Then cut the crap and start the battle. Kong Yuran grinned while she suddenly launched an attack. Bang! With a single gesture, boundless dazzling 5-colored light rumbled as they effused out and enveloped the entire battlefield, and they were immeasurably divine and filled every inch of the battlefield. Kong Yuran's clothes fluttered as she controlled the 5-colored light, and her entire body flowed with an inviolable and terrifying aura of divine might. 5-shade blade, heaven split. Kong Yuran strode through space while boundless 5-colored energy condensed into a sharp resplendent blade, and it shot through the sky towards Lang Xinghuan. Hiss! Hiss! The blade was murderous and terrifying to the extreme, and everywhere it passed, space was slashed into pieces without it encountering any resistance at all. Amazing! This probably is Kong Yuren's true strength. She clearly held back a great deal during the previous battles. Xianxia's eyes narrowed as he clearly sensed how terrifying Kong Yuren's attack was. It wasn't just Xianxia, all the other cultivators in the surroundings had acutely noticed this. At this moment, Kong Yuren had changed. She'd become completely different to how she was in all the previous battles. The might revealed from every single move she made could even shock some imperial monarchs, and they were truly unable to imagine that she was merely an existence at the universe-enlightened ancestral god realm. Rumble. At the same time that Kong Yuren launched an attack, Lung Xinghuan had attacked ferociously as well. His figure was mighty and suffused with the calamity energy, whereas his eyes were completely emotionless, deep like an abyss, and cold to a horrifying degree. Yin and Yang reside at the ends of the world. Calamity is the bridge and the chains of blood are the catalyst. Amidst his emotionless and indifferent voice, Lung Xinghuan grabbed with his hands, and then a myriad of blood-red divine chains suddenly surged out from space. They were coiled with surging and dazzling calamity energy as they covered the heavens and the earth. The blood-red divine chains emanated an oppressive aura that caused one's heart to palpitate with fear. It was a form of the energy of calamity that had arrived at an extreme, and it was a form of the energy of heavenly tribulation that caused the hearts of all living beings to tremble and suffused with fear. Rumble. As soon as these blood-red chains that were filled with the aura of calamity and heavenly tribulation appeared, they practically destroyed half of the 5-colored light that enveloped the surroundings. On the other hand, Lung Xinghuan was like a king that wielded the power of punishment for the heavens, and his imposing aura was astounding to the extreme. Such a scene could absolutely be described as world-shocking. Kong Yuren seemed as if she controlled light, and 5-colored divine radiance enshrouded her entire body, causing her to seem divine and extraordinary while deterring others from committing any disrespect. On the other hand, Lung Xinghuan was like the emotionless heaven Tao. He was murderous, cold, emotionless, and caused terror and oppression to strike at the deepest depths of one's heart. Such a pair of man and woman were in battle on the battlefield at this moment, and the strength they revealed simply caused all the cultivators here to be astounded and feel as if they were being suffocated. The energy of heavenly tribulation. Amazing! He has actually started to borrow the might of the heaven Tao for his own use while still at the universe-enlightened ancestral god realm. This kid's natural talent can truly be described as unprecedented. Within Convergence Hall, the gaze of Tao Lord Xueling from Nuwas Tao Palace was like a bolt of lightning. It surged with divine radiance while her voice carried a wisp of surprise. You flatter him. That descendant of the primeval Peacock King is extraordinary as well for being able to fully fuse the 5 great inheritances of Nuwas Tao Palace. The sovereign sex Tao Lord Su Tuo spoke with a hoarse and low voice. If one wasn't aware of the true situation, they would think that these two Tao Lords had a good relationship. Yet only those that truly understood the relationship between them knew that while they seemed to be praising the other's disciple, they had actually started to show signs of competing with each other. No matter if it's Lung Xinghuan or Kong Yuren, both of them can be said to be peerless geniuses that lead a generation, so they are worthy of commendation regardless of who wins. Tao Lord Kai stroked his beard and smiled. Grand Lord, fellow Taoist Xian Ming, what do the two of you think? Wu Xuechan smiled and neither agreed nor disagreed. Xian Ming said coldly instead, That's difficult to say for sure. Kaya roared with laughter, and then he stopped mentioning this topic. As they spoke, their gazes were still fixed on the battlefield at all times. Existences that had attained their levels of cultivation were naturally able to discern that the outcome of this battle would probably not be determined in a short period of time. Calamity, heavenly tribulation. At this moment, Xianxia's eyes couldn't help but narrow. While he was still in the 3 dimensions, he was extremely familiar with the energy of calamity because he frequently fought with the disciples of the sovereign sect. However, the energy of calamity that Lung Xinghuan executed was clearly not ordinary, and it was filled with the energy of heavenly tribulation. Its might was terrifying to the point even Xianxia's heart shook incessantly. Heavenly tribulation. Xianxia had seen this force in the past, but it was from the eye of heavenly tribulation. So how could Xianxia have imagined that Lung Xinghuan could actually control such a force? Looks like Lung Xinghuan has obviously obtained the true inheritance of the sovereign sect. He's actually able to utilize the energy of heavenly tribulation. He truly can't be underestimated. Xianxia muttered in his heart. No wonder you made me feel uncomfortable. So, you've grasped the energy of heavenly tribulation. That's fine as well. Let me see if your energy of heavenly tribulation is more formidable or my inheritance of the 5 colors is stronger. On the battlefield, Kong Yuren's clear eyes had focused as well when she witnessed Lung Xinghuan's ability. And then a wisp of blazing light erupted from her while her will to fight grew stronger. Humph! A wisp of a cold arm arose on the corners of Lung Xinghuan's mouth. I'll convince you of your inferiority. Rumble. An intense battle erupted between them. Divine radiance collided while techniques charged against each other. Extremely terrifying destructive force erupted from the collisions between them, and it gave others the feeling that the world was about to collapse, be crushed into powder, and transformed into nothingness. Fortunately, all of this was occurring within the Tao-engraved battlefield, or the consequences would be unimaginable. This battle could really be considered as unprecedentedly rare, and its impetus was so great and the dangers of it was so horrifying that it had arrived at an unprecedented height. It caused hearts of all the spectators in the outside world to be filled with excitement, and they were unable to maintain their calm. Many imperial monarchs sighed with emotion because they were absolutely unable to display such world-shocking might while they were at the peak of the universe-enlightened ancestral god realm all those years ago. On the other hand, when the universe-enlightened ancestral god realm experts witness all of this, every single one of them felt frustrated. They felt that they were far inferior to existences like Lung Xinghuan and Kong Yuran, and it was even to the extent that such existences were beyond their reach. As for Xianxia, he'd been calmly analyzing the battle since the beginning, and he ceaselessly deduced how he would deal with Lung Xinghuan if he took Kong Yuran's place. Bang! After the time for an entire incense stick to burn, a terrifying sound of collision resounded on the battlefield, and it was deafening like the world was collapsing. In the next moment, Lung Xinghuan's figure suddenly staggered back by over 100 m. In an instant, the spectators were astounded. Could it be that Lung Xinghuan is about to be suppressed? At this moment, the Tao Lord Su Tuo's muddy eyes couldn't help but focus. Bang! Before the spectators could recover from their shock, Kong Yuran had seized this opportunity to launch another attack, and the 5-colored divine radiance blazed like flames as it rumbled and sprayed towards Lung Xinghuan. However, when he saw this scene, Xianxia couldn't help but feel a wisp of horror in his heart, and he said inwardly, "Shit. Sure enough, right when Kong Yuran executed this attack, Lung Xinghuan, who seemed to be in a sorry state, had suddenly raised his head, and then a pitch-black and icy cold eye suddenly appeared soundlessly in the space between his brows. The eye of emotionless, indifferent, and deep to the point it caused one's heart to palpitate with fear. As soon as it appeared, it emanated a strand of gray and hazy divine light that flashed in space. In an instant, all the spectators of the battle noticed Kong Yuran's figure stiffen abruptly, and then a wisp of shock arose on her peerlessly beautiful face. Right after that, she seemed as if she'd been struck by lightning. Her pretty face turned ghastly pale while she suddenly coughed up a mouthful of blood. Bang! At this moment, Lung Xinghuan's figure had suddenly appeared and slapped with his palm. Kong Yuran tried to resist instinctively, yet it was too late. She was forcefully blasted flying by this attack, and she successively coughed up mouthfuls of blood while her expression became dispirited to the extreme. You've lost. Lung Xinghuan immediately stopped attacking when he witnessed this, and then he spoke indifferently. On the other hand, the eye that appeared soundlessly in the space between his brows had vanished. All the spectators were shocked and speechless. All of this had occurred too quickly. They'd originally thought that Lung Xinghuan would be suppressed, yet never had they imagined that Kong Yuran would have actually lose in the blink of an eye. It was even to the extent that most cultivators hadn't been able to clearly see what sort of ability Lung Xinghuan had utilized to accomplish this. All of this simply seemed too inconceivable. Only Xianxia sighed in his heart and felt extreme pity for Kong Yuran. How could he be unable to discern it? He was 80% confident that the eye which had appeared in the space between Lung Xinghuan's brows was the eye of heavenly tribulation. The eye of heavenly tribulation, huh? Such a force isn't something you're able to control now. But you've still won. Kong Yuran puckered her lips and sighed lightly on the battlefield, and then she turned around and left the battlefield. Moreover, she didn't seem to reveal much unwillingness to accept this outcome. At practically the exact same time, Lung Xinghuan left swiftly as well. At this point, the first battle had come to an end, and the surroundings were already filled with clamorous noise. All of them were exclaiming with surprise and seemed to be filled with disbelief. Of course, there were many that were shocked by the ability Lung Xinghuan revealed. I feel bad for making Nuwas Dao Palace lose the myriad Dao Pearl. In Convergence Hall, the sovereign sex Dao Lord Su Tuo opened his muddy eyes and sighed with emotion, and his voice was hoarse, low, and carried a tone of satisfaction. Kong Yuran's defeat represented she had no chance of participating in the final battle during the Dao discussion, and she completely lost any qualification to compete for the first. So, the sovereign sex Dao Lord Su Tuo sighed in that way. Dao Lord Xueling seemed to be very calm and indifferent when facing this. She merely said lightly, even though Yuran has lost, Lung Xinghuan may not necessarily be able to obtain the first in the end. She paused for a moment and continued. On the contrary, I feel that if the myriad Dao Pearl falls into Xianxia's hands, then it can be considered to be put to good use and isn't really a loss. Her words carried deep meaning within them. Dao Lord Su Tuo's eyes narrowed, and then he chuckled and didn't speak further. Wu Shuachan smiled lightheartedly instead, and he smiled to Dao Lord Xueling and said, my little junior brother would probably be very happy if he knew that fellow Taoist Xueling thought so highly of him. Xueling smiled and said, I'm just telling the truth. Then there's no harm for me to be honest. I'm afraid that whether Xianxia will be able to seize the first depends on whether my Divine Institute's Donghuang Inxian will even allow him to do so. Dao Lord Xianming spoke abruptly with an indifferent and dignified voice, and it didn't carry any traces of emotion. Wu Shuachan's smile faded before he lightly spat out a few words from between his lips. Then let's wait and see. Right at this moment, Huai Kongzi's voice resounded from outside the hall. The second battle, Xianxia against Donghuang Inxian. Xianxia, you must be careful. Don't forget that I placed 2 natural spirit treasures on you, said Shiryu. Xianxia couldn't help but smiled, and then he nodded before he flashed towards the Dao-engraved battlefield. At the same time, Donghuang Inxian had set out as well. Both of them had moved without any hesitation, and they revealed extremely strong confidence. At this moment, the gazes of all the cultivators in 10 Direction City and Convergence Hall had shot towards Xianxia and Donghuang Inxian, and their gazes burned with anticipation. Who do all of you think will be able to obtain victory in the battle? It's naturally Donghuang Inxian. No, it'll be Xianxia. Many were arguing, but even more remained silent. They seemed to be unable to determine exactly which participant in this battle was stronger. He's only a step away from being able to enter the final battle. Shinta Yenron's beautiful eyes glistened while she silently looked forward to that moment in her heart. She naturally hoped that Xianxia could be victorious, and she even hoped that Xianxia could attain victory in the final battle and become the first-ranked expert in the Dao discussion. You must win. At this moment, Lu Wuhan, Yu Qiujing, Zhuanyu Shui, and the others couldn't help but feel nervous. Martial ancestral uncle will definitely succeed, Tu Meng and Gu Yen muttered in their hearts. The Dao-engraved battlefield. Xianxia and Donghuang Inxian stood in confrontation from afar. At this moment, both their expressions were very calm and composed. However, the more they acted in this way, the more the others were able to sense that they would definitely stop at nothing to obtain victory in this battle. After all, this was truly a critical battle. It decided which one amongst them would be able to advance into the final battle and compete to obtain the first position in the Dao discussion. So, no matter if it was Xianxia or Donghuang Inxian, they would absolutely not allow themselves to make any careless mistake, be negligent, or hold back for the sake of that. Chun-Shi, we meet again. The matters of the world truly are marvelous. Out-battle in the Tao Cauldron world that day had been spoiled. Yet now you're standing before me again. This time, nothing unexpected will occur again, said Donghuang Yinxian. His long hair had been tied into a ponytail, causing his extremely handsome face to be fully revealed. Moreover, he had a carefree and composed bearing that was completely different from the stiff and stern bearings that the other disciples of the Divine Institute possessed. It's best that nothing unexpected occurs. Chun-Shi spoke indifferently and in a concise manner. He truly didn't have the mood to waste his breath on Donghuang Yinxian. Heh! Then let me experience your Tao of dual swords. Amidst his composed laughter, Donghuang Yinxian's figure flashed while his entire body emanated extremely brilliant golden radiance, and every single strand of his hair turned gold. When looked at from afar, he was simply like a golden god of war, and he was dazzling and resplendent to the extreme. The square-shaped and simple Taishan Codex that emanated a mysterious aura flowed up into the air. The tune of the Tao rumbled from it while strings of strange and obscure Tao markings were released from within it. In an instant, Donghuang Yinxian's imposing aura rose to the limit, and his divine might surged. Swoosh! Swoosh! At practically the exact same instant, Chun-Shi flipped his palms, and then Banisher and the talisman armament appeared in unison. One was dark green in color, divine and extraordinary. The other was suffused with clear chaotic chi and was both ancient and mysterious. As soon as they appeared, an irresistibly copious and peerlessly fierce aura suddenly effused out from Chun-Shi's body. Rumble! They hadn't even clashed yet, but the might both of them revealed had collided with each other, and it caused terrifying rumbling to resound while space was thrown into disorder and blasted into pieces. Such a scene caused the others to have no doubt that if an ordinary person was dragged into the battle, then just this might alone would be sufficient to annihilate that person on the spot. The brilliant primeval times, the indistinct quintessence of the Tao. The Taoists bring peace to the world through scriptures. World Crusher. Donghuang Yinxian let out a long howl as he flashed through the air, and then a brilliant page of scripture condensed into form from the Taishan Codex. Every single word within the scripture was like the sun and moon, and they emanated boundless brilliance. When looked at from afar, that tiny page of scripture seemed to contain countless suns and moons that were adding radiance and beauty to each other, and they illuminated the world. The third page of the Taishan Codex, World Crusher. The sun, moon, and the first 4 stars of the Big Dipper illuminate the 9 heaves. Once it's executed, it's capable of crushing all things. The scripture has transformed into the sun and the moon, and it reveals the scene of alternation within the world. This is extraordinary. Looks like Donghuang Yinxian has realized that Chun-Shi can't be underestimated. So he utilized one of his trump cards as soon as the battle began. All the great figures in the surroundings were shocked. Bang! As the scripture soared in the sky, it was like a myriad of suns and moon had appeared, and they exuded an extremely terrifying crushing force. Being amidst this force was like residing at the eye of a cosmic tempest, and one would be restrained and crushed. It seemed as if it even wanted to drag one's soul into a boundless abyss and crush one's soul there. This attack is quite formidable. Its aura of the Tao is natural, and its crushing force is world-shocking. Any other person would probably be instantly annihilated on the spot. Chun-Shi's consciousness was like a storm that swept out, and he didn't hesitate to flash away when he sensed how terrifying this attack was. Swoosh! In the next moment, Chun-Shi had executed the Rock Divine technique, and he seemed as if he rose above the sky and traveled between reality as his figure vanished. Quick! 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 Inconceivably quick. Chun-Shi's figure had left that area enveloped by the crushing force in less than 1/10 of an instant, and then the dual swords in his hands shook as he slashed with them. The Banisher floated like a cloud, and it was elusive. The talisman armament was like a powerful ocean that shot straight ahead. 2 completely different strands of sword chi revealed similar brilliances of talisman markings at this moment, and they intersected in midair and revealed extremely terrifying might. Rumble! Rumble! World-shocking sounds of collision resounded. For a time, inch after inch of the space in the surroundings was crushed into powder. It seemed like the sun and moon had collided, mountains had collapsed, and tidal waves had struck. The heavens and the earth were in chaos. However, the two of them were actually equally matched in such an intense collision, and both were unable to gain the upper hand. Humph! Dong Huang Yinxian grunted coldly, while golden radiance sprayed from his entire body. His clothes fluttered as he strode through space with the Taishan Codex in his control, and he attacked once more. Row after row of ancient and obscure markings of the Tao floated up into appearance. They seemed like blades, swords, and halberd that were filled with the supreme aura of the Tao, and the might of every single marking of the Tao wasn't inferior to a natural sprit treasure at all. Xianxia remained absolutely calm and composed when facing this attack. He held the two swords in his hands as he executed the rock divine technique and fought incessantly with Dong Huang Yinxian. Moreover, he'd changed his method of battle. He'd stopped going head-on against Dong Huang Yinxian's attacks, and he relied on the rock divine technique to launch nimble and sudden assaults by relying on his speed. He was like an illusory and ethereal shadow that traveled between reality. Cultivators of the sword had always been adept in nimbleness, speed, and offense. Xianxia, who'd attained the third level of the Sword Emperor realm, had even displayed these characteristics to the limit, and he attacked head-on when needed and dodged when necessary. On the other hand, Dong Huang Yinxian maintained his style from before. He revealed powerful divine might as he utilized the Taishan Codex, and his attacks were controlled accurately and extremely dense. Xianxia was like a flash of light that flickered without end, causing Dong Huang Yinxian's attacks to accomplish nothing. But at the same time, Xianxia's attacks were unable to break through his defenses as well. It seemed to be a very ordinary battle, but in reality, this battle was absolutely not inferior to the battle between Leng Xinghuan and Kong Yuran, and it was even to the extent that this battle was even more dangerous and intense. Because since the battle had begun, both of them had utilized their strongest ability, and the might they revealed could be described as world-shocking. Under such circumstances, the cultivators in the outside world had been dazzled and successively shocked by the battle, causing them to practically forget to breath. I never expected that the Taishan Codex would actually be so miraculous. It will probably take some time to break through his defenses. Xianxia had been constantly looking for an opportunity throughout the battle, but he was unable to find one in a short period of time. All of this was because the Taishan Codex's strength was too heaven-defying. Its Tao markings were like a work of nature and contained all sorts of profundities, so they were very difficult to destroy. However, Xianxia wasn't in a rush. Even though the Taishan Codex was formidable, he was even more confident in the talisman armament that had advanced into a natural spirit treasure. Conversely, Dong Huang Yinxian was shocked in his heart. Never had he imagined that Xianxia's combat strength would actually be even more formidable than the combat strength Xianxia had displayed before this. Not only did Xianxia's dual swords possess unfathomable and formidable might, even Xianxia's movement technique was swift and mysterious to the extreme. This fellow is swift, and his sword Tao is shocking. I'm actually harm him at all even when I utilized the might of the Taishan Codex's 5th page. If I continue exhausting my strength like this, then I would probably expose all my ability and allow that fellow's Leng Xinghuan to witness it all. In that way, even if I defeat this fellow, Xianxia, Leng Xinghuan would definitely be in an advantageous position during the next battle. Looks like I have no choice but to utilize something else. As he blinked, a trace of a resolute and ruthless expression appeared in Dong Huang Yinxian's eyes. Bang! Suddenly, his figure stopped moving while golden light surged explosively from his body, causing him to seem like a fiend god that had descended to the world. At the same time, a simple and smooth jade brush that was 15 centimeters long had appeared in his palm. The tip of the brush was like a blade, and it was suffused with the clear glow of chaotic qi and emanated a sharp glow. The Tao Control Brush? Wu Xuechan's brows knit together imperceptibly within Convergence Hall. At this instant, it wasn't just Wu Xuechan who'd recognized this treasure. Many other great figures had as well. Surprisingly, it was another supreme divine artifact of the Divine Institute, the Tao Control Brush. Dao control, it meant that one could control the Dao with it. If this brush was utilized by itself, then perhaps its strength couldn't be considered as miraculous. But once it was utilized alongside the Taishan Codex, then its strength would multiply. In other words, the Dao control brush and Taishan Codex were two divine artifacts that complemented each other. On the other hand, great figures like Wuxia, Xueling, Su Tuo, Kaya, and the others were clearly aware that this pair of divine artifacts was extraordinary. They were precious treasures that the Divine Institute's dean carried with him as he fought throughout the world all those years ago. They possessed unfathomable might. Moreover, there were countless legends related to this pair of divine artifacts. It was exactly because of this that the cultivators in the outside world were so shocked upon noticing that the Dao control brush was in Donghuang Yinxuan's possession. None of them had imagined that the Divine Institute's dean would actually entrust such a precious treasure to Donghuang Yinxian. After all, no matter how extraordinary and outstanding Donghuang Yinxian was, his status was inferior when compared to the great figures at the imperial monarch realm within the Divine Institute. Yet he was able to obtain such a precious treasure. This clearly showed that the Divine Institute's dean had placed high hopes on Donghuang Yinxian in the Dao discussion. Hiss! Donghuang Yinxian held the Taishan Codex in one hand and the Dao control brush in the other. He drew in midair as if he was writing a literary piece of the Grand Dao. In an instant, a character that was suffused with a pitch-black glow appeared in midair. It emanated an obscure, icy cold, and deathly silent supreme aura that intended to shackle the world. At this moment, the airflow, space, light, dust, everything within the Dao engraved battlefield seemed to have been shackled, and they fell into a strange, deathly silent state. The cultivators in the outside world couldn't help but gasp. It was merely a single character, yet it seemed like a brand of the Grand Dao, and it possessed boundless terrifying might that exceeded their imagination. He bears the luck of the Divine Institute and writes its words via its divine techniques. This kid has actually obtained the supreme inheritance of the Divine Institute. Wu Shuichan's brows raised while he sat up straight, and a wisp of a piercingly cold glow arose in his eyes. He was clearly aware what this meant. If nothing unexpected happened, then Donghuang Yinxian would succeed the position of dean in the Divine Institute once he became accomplished. At practically the exact same moment that Donghuang Yinxian executed the character, the talisman armament in Xianxia's hand suddenly emanated a strange fluctuation that swept out like a ripple. Boundless divine talismans shot out like a dense rain, and it formed the movement of the heavens and the earth, the circulation of the stars, the passage of time, the alternation between generations, and various other grand phenomena. They coiled around the talisman armament and seemed as if they revealed all the boundless variations and changes in the cosmos. Talisman armament. The profundities of formation. As soon as this scene appeared, even if they were outside the battlefield, a wisp of indescribable shock still couldn't help but arise in their hearts. It was like they'd witnessed the transition between the Grand Dao and creation, and it displayed boundless profundities and truths. Even all the great figures couldn't help but reveal surprised expressions while they felt shocked in their hearts. What divine artifact is this? It actually possesses such might? Why have I never heard of it? This was the might of the talisman armament after it transformed into a natural spirit treasure. The talisman armament was a treasure made from divine talismans, and it was unlike the divine artifacts in the world. It possessed the potential to endlessly improve its might. Later on, Xianxia utilized a natural spirit foundation, supplemented it with a secret technique to transform the talisman armament into a natural spirit treasure. So, when compared to the past, it had two unprecedentedly rare abilities, formation and devour. It formed the profundities and truths of the cosmos, and it devoured the vitality of everything. Not only did it possess shocking offensive ability, it could devour other treasures to improve its own might. Amongst the natural spirit treasures in the world, there were almost none that possessed such might, and this was the most formidable and mysterious aspect of the talisman armament, since it transformed into a natural spirit treasure. At this moment, even Wu Shuichan couldn't help but exclaim with admiration in his heart when he witnessed this scene. little junior brother, actually refined the talisman armament into a natural spirit treasure. This is something that has never been done in the sect. What treasure is that? The eyes of the other Tao Lords narrowed with a trace of surprise within them. They were naturally clearly aware of Oracle Mountain's talisman armaments, but they'd similarly discerned that the talisman armament in Xianxia's hand should be called a natural spirit treasure. But a natural spirit treasure was a treasure born within the chaos, and it was impossible to be created by man. What's going on? A natural spirit foundation. In practically an instant, all of these Tao Lords thought of a reason, and all sorts of emotions couldn't help but arise in their hearts. Where the marking of the Tao reaches, all shall be shackled and destroyed. It took a long time to describe, yet it actually happened in an instant. At this moment, Donghuang Yinxian had let out a long howl and activated the character to crush down at Xianxia. OM. A strand of pitch-black divine light swept out like a ripple. Everywhere it passed, space was restrained while light, airflow, and even divine radiance was frozen on the spot. A terrifying aura of deathly silence swiftly suffused the entire battlefield, and it swept towards Xianxia at an unparalleled speed. This was Donghuang Yinxian's trump card. At this moment, he'd executed it for the sake overcoming the stalemate they were in and restraining Xianxia in one go. He didn't intend to continue being locked in combat with Xianxia like he had been until now. Swoosh! At practically the exact same moment, the talisman armament flashed through the sky and formed numerous sword-shaped talisman markings that densely overlapped around the talisman armament, causing his sword insight to grow even fiercer and sharper. When looked at from afar, it caused others to feel horrified as if they'd been stabbed through and through. This was the profundity of formation possessed by the talisman armament. It could transform the might possessed by the talisman armament into all sorts of different energies according to Xianxia's will. Just like this very moment, Donghuang Yinxian had utilized the Tao marking with the intention of restraining and annihilating Xianxia, and Xianxia's reaction was very simply. He intended to destroy this restriction. In a very natural manner, the talisman markings formed by the talisman armament possessed the strongest energy of destruction, and it supplemented Xianxia's cultivation at the third level of the Sword Emperor realm. Coupled with the most fierce and swift attack within the profound heartsword technique, the dismemberment style, it had risen the might of this attack to the extreme. Bang! When this strike of the sword shot over, the rippling pitch-black energy of restriction had suddenly shaken before it instantly became sluggish. Donghuang Yinxian's brows raised while he circulated his full strength, causing the character in midair to incessantly drone and emanate deafening rumbling. It roared like a vast and mighty river, and it actually shook the entire battlefield to the point the battlefield trembled slightly. However, Xianxia's attack didn't disperse. It formed into even more restriction-destruction talisman markings that overlapped on the strand of sword chi, causing its might to improve once more. Rumble! In an instant, their attack entered into a stalemate in midair, causing a myriad of strands of divine radiance to spray and sweep towards the surroundings. When he saw this, Xianxia didn't hesitate to swiftly slash with the banisher that resided in his right hand. This strike seemed like a torrent of obliteration had been sent down from the sky, and it crushed space and time as it charged over ferociously. Bang! 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 Under the circumstance that he'd utilized both his swords, a string of extremely ear-piercing sounds of explosions instantly resounded through the heavens and the earth. That floated in midair had been blasted into pieces in the blink of an eye, and it vanished without a trace. Donghuang Yinxian was caught off guard, and he was shaken by this to the point of staggering back while the vital blood in his entire body roiled without end. How terrifying! The hearts of all the spectators in the outside world trembled, and all of them were astounded by how formidable Xianxia's attack was. How could this be possible? In Convergence Hall, Xianxia couldn't help but cry out. But in the next moment, his entire body stiffened while his voice stopped abruptly, because at this exact same instant, Tao Lord Xianming had turned around and glanced at him with a dignified and indifferent gaze. Even though it was merely a glance, it shocked Xianxia to the point of immediately falling silent like a cicada in the winter. Haha. Anything is possible in the world. Wuxia couldn't help but chuckle when he witnessed this. Humph. The outcome hasn't been decided yet. Grand Lord shouldn't get happy too early. Xian Ming spoke coldly. Then continue watching the battle. Wuxia smiled indifferently. Actually, he was rather filled with admiration towards his little junior brother's display because it had really exceeded his expectations. What sword is that? Dong Huang Yinxian had a solemn, surprised, and bewildered expression. He was utterly unable to imagine that he would actually still be unable to suppress Xianxia even after he withdrew the Dao control brush. This had exceeded his expectations. I'll naturally tell you the answer once you've lost. As he spoke, Xianxia's figure flashed, and he attacked once more with his dual swords in hand. Humph! Do you think that this is the limit of my ability? Dong Huang Yinxian's face sank. The Taishan Codex droned as row after row of mysterious markings of the Dao sprayed from within it. He controlled these markings of the Dao with the Dao control brush, and they emanated brilliant light in midair. Descend! Fight! Army! Crush! Slash! As he shouted loudly, a Dao marking shot out towards Xianxia, and every single one of them possessed supreme divine might and were completely different. When looked at from afar, these Dao markings were like numerous peerless experts that charged ceaselessly while emanating monstrous might. Obviously, Dong Huang Yinxian had been infuriated at this moment, and his killing intent had been completely aroused. Every single move of his was unfathomable, and he seemed to intend to crush Xianxia in one go. No matter how many moves you have, they are all in vain. A wisp of a piercingly cold arc arose on the corners of Xianxia's mouth, and he emanated supreme and imposing divine might. He stopped holding back as well, and he strode through space to intercept Dong Huang Yinxian's attacks. Bang! The Dao marking of descend was slashed into pieces. Bang! The Dao marking of fight was slashed into pieces. Bang! The Dao marking of army was slashed into pieces. Under the astounded gazes of everyone, Xianxia was like a peerless exalt of the sword that crushed everything in his way with ease. No matter what lethal attack Dong Huang Yinxian executed, all of them were crushed by Xianxia and were unable to harm him at all. Conversely, as he continued the attack, Dong Huang Yinxian's expression gradually turned gloomy, and he stared fixedly at Xianxia as if he was meeting Xianxia for the first time. He was too surprised. The combat strength Xianxia revealed at this moment wasn't just a little bit stronger than when he fought Wang Zhong, and it was simply like he'd become a completely different person. All of these changes had instantly caught Dong Huang Yinxian off guard, and it caused his heart to be filled by both shock and fury. At this moment, it wasn't just Dong Huang Yinxian who was shocked. All the cultivators in the outside world couldn't help but be dumbstruck and stunned speechless when they witnessed such a scene. That was Dong Huang Yinxian, an existence that had ascended into the top 4 of the Tao discussion. And he even possessed unparalleled divine artifacts like the Taishan Codex and Tao Control Brush. Under such circumstances, he was actually unable to do anything against Xianxia's attack? Who could have imagined such a thing would happen? Exactly how much strength has this fellow concealed? Lung Xinghuan muttered while his brows were knit together. He suddenly noticed that he actually had an even deeper feeling of being unable to see through Xianxia. So, he really had concealed a great deal of strength. Wang Zhong, who'd been eliminated from the Dao discussion, was constantly watching this battle. So, when he witnessed Xianxia's seemingly unparalleled assault, his heart couldn't help but feel heavy. He finally understood that his loss wasn't undeserved at all because Xianxia was way stronger than he'd expected.